This subcommittee will come to order. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. In 2005, 61 drug shortages were reported to FDA. By 2010, there were 178 reported drug shortages, 132 of which involve sterile injectable drugs. So far this year, FDA has continued to see an increasing number of shortages, especially those involving older sterile injectable drugs. These shortages have involved cancer drugs, anesthetics used for patients undergoing surgery, as well as drugs needed for emergency medicine and electrolytes needed for patients on IV feeding. It appears that there are many potential causes for these drug shortages. In some cases, shortages have been caused by quality and manufacturing issues. Additionally, production delays at the manufacturer level, including limited production lines for certain older drugs and difficulty in receiving raw materials and components from suppliers, have caused drug shortages. Many raw material suppliers also experience capacity problems at their facilities, causing delays that ripple through the drug production process. Shortages can also result from a company discontinuing a particular drug. Certain drugs are susceptible to shortages, particularly those that are complex to manufacture, such as injectable drugs, or require longer lead times. FDA cannot compel a company to manufacture a particular drug, and if there is a shortage of that drug, it cannot compel other firms to increase their capacity. Further, companies are not required to notify FDA in advance of a potential drug shortage, unless a company is discontinuing a sole source, medically necessary drug. In that case, a company must inform FDA 6 months in advance. Drug shortages have real effects on real patients. Due to shortages, patients have not received the appropriate drugs for their conditions, often getting a less effective drug or a more costly substitute as a result. According to a study done by Premier Healthcare Alliance of 228 hospitals, retail pharmacies, and other healthcare facilities, nearly 90% of hospitals reported a drug shortage in the last half of last year that may have caused a patient safety issue, resulted in a procedure's delay or cancellation, required a more expensive substitute, or resulted in a pharmacist compounding a drug. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about their experiences with drug shortages and learning what remedies they believe are necessary. I would like to say a special hello to Richard Paletti, Vice President, Operations, Pharmacy and Laboratory and Radiology at Lancaster General Hospital in my home district. Lancaster General is the largest employer in the 16th Congressional District, and for 10 of the past 13 years, it has been named among the top 100 hospitals in America by Thomson Reuters, a leading source of healthcare business intelligence. The hospital is also helping to revitalize the northwestern part of Lancaster City through a partnership with Franklin and Marshall College. Again, thank you to our witnesses, and I will yield the balance of my time to Congressman Shimkus from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We want to welcome our folks at the two panels. Obviously, this is of concern. I'm a market-based conservative capitalist, and whenever there is a lag in a commodity good or product, you have to really wonder about the demand and the supply and the available cost, because when there's limited supply and a high demand, cost should go up. So that begs the question is, what's constraining the market signals from producing the product that the consumers need? Is that insurance companies? Is that government reimbursement rates? Is that the state Medicaid provisions? That's what I'll be looking at, because the bigger the government is, the more manipulative it gets in the market services, the less its ability to provide goods and services to consumers. So we appreciate that. Look forward to it, and I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Chair, thanks. Gentlemen, recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding today's hearing on this important issue. I'm encouraged by the bipartisan nature of this effort and thank our witnesses for joining us. Today we'll discuss the recent increase in drug shortages that have been the subject of numerous reports, drug shortages appear to be on the rise at an alarming rate and are threatening the supply of some of our most important medications, from life-saving oncology drugs to antibiotics that rid us of infection to anesthetics that get us through even the most minor surgical procedures. These drugs have become an important part of our healthcare system. No patient wants to be told that their chemotherapy must be postponed because the only drug used to treat their type of cancer is unavailable. And likewise, no anesthesiologist wants to begin their workday with the realization that they'll have to use subpar drugs on a patient because the one they normally rely on is out of stock indefinitely. So we can't let this become the new norm. We have depended upon the medications on the FDA's drug shortage list for years and continue to look for them for our health and well-being. It's alarming that drugs that have been around for so long would suddenly be the most difficult to keep hospitals, pharmacies, and doctors' offices supplied with. Furthermore, these drugs tend to be low-cost generics, which are an essential component of health care for most Americans as they seek to keep their health care costs low. In this fiscal climate, having a readily accessible supply of generic medication is of profound importance, and to that end, it's been disheartening to learn that the so-called gray market would take advantage of such a dire situation to engage in price gouging at the expense of those desperate enough to pay. So I'm hoping that we can begin today to identify the cause of these shortages and discuss solutions for replenishing our drug supply. We must address this sudden increase so that Americans can continue to receive high-quality treatments at low costs and remain confident both the pharmaceutical industry and healthcare providers. Unfortunately, companies are not currently required to report to the FDA when a shortage will be occurring, whether because of change in investment strategy or manufacturing difficulties. There's currently no policy for notification unless the company is the sole manufacturer. My colleague, Representative DeGette, has introduced bipartisan legislation, H.R. 2245, the Preserving Access to Life-Saving Medications Act of 2011, as the first step in addressing this issue. This legislation would require manufacturers to notify the FDA of any actual or prospective drug shortages. And I want to commend Representative DeGette on pioneering this effort and hope that, as a result of hearing from our witnesses today, we can identify additional solutions to this growing problem. This hearing will allow us to learn more about why drug shortages are occurring, what the administration and industry are doing to address the problem, and what new authorities the FDA might need to prevent shortages from happening in the future. And I'm encouraged that we're exploring this issue in our subcommittee today. Look forward to working with you, Chairman Pitts, as we get to the bottom of this issue. And again, thank you for having the hearing. I yield back. Do you want to
The chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Pitts, for recognizing me and for holding this hearing. Recent media and other reports indicate that drug shortages are now at an unprecedented level. Indeed, according to FDA, the number of drugs in short supply in 2010 was almost triple that of 2005. The shortages affect a broad spectrum of critically important drugs, including oncology drugs to treat lymphoma, leukemia, breast, and other cancers, anesthesia drugs, without which surgeries have to be postponed, and antibiotics to remedy life-threatening bacterial infections. Without these drugs, patients' lives are at risk. Drug scarcities generally affect sterile injectable drugs. These drugs are technically difficult to make, and each drug is usually manufactured by only one or a handful of producers. If any one company develops manufacturing problems, which is not uncommon, other companies may have little excess capacity to help fill the need. With the aging of our population, the outsourcing of drug manufacturing, the increasing consolidation of drug companies, and the general adoption of a just-in-time approach to drug production and distribution, this problem may be significantly worse unless immediate measures, including congressional action, are taken to address its multiple causes. Representative DeGette has introduced legislation that would be an important first step in this process. H.R. 2245, the Preserving Access to Life-Saving Medications Act of 2011, would require manufacturers to notify FDA of any actual or prospective drug shortages. Such advance notice would enable FDA to help avoid or mitigate the shortage by both working with the manufacturer and alerting hospitals and physicians of the problem. While this is an important piece of legislation that has broad bipartisan support, I don't think anyone believes it alone can solve the drug shortage problem. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today to better understand the causes of what is already a crisis for many patients and to find out what we in Congress can do to help prevent shortages in the future. We already have been working in a bipartisan manner to learn about this very disturbing issue, and I trust that we'll continue to work together to develop and enact legislation to help address it and address it quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the time.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. That concludes our opening statements. Our first panel will be Assistant Secretary for Health at HHS, Mr. Howard Koh. And Mr. Koh, you may begin your testimony. Please summarize in 5 minutes. We'll put your entire testimony and the written testimony in the record. You may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Pitts, Ranking Member Pallone, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm Dr. Howard Koh, the Assistant Secretary for Health at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I'm very pleased to be joined here by my colleague, Dr. Sandy Queter, Deputy Director of the FDA Office of New Drugs. As you have already heard, the growing problem of drug shortages is a troubling situation and one that the Department and the Secretary take very seriously. This growing trend has the potential to impact on our entire healthcare system, and as we discuss this problem today, we should always remember that our goal is to protect the health of people affected most by these shortages, patients and their families. And I say that as a physician who has cared for patients for over 30 years. According to the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, CDER, the number of drug shortages has been rising steadily over the last 5 years, as you have already heard. And although shortages can occur with any drug, generic sterile injectables currently make up a large and increasing share. And in fact, in 2010, some 74% of these shortages involve these older sterile injectable agents. So these include critical products such as oncology drugs, anesthetics, parenteral nutrition drugs, and many drugs used in emergency rooms. There is no single reason why drug shortages occur. So ultimately, in any given situation, many factors are involved and underlying causes may operate either alone or in combination to cause a shortage. These factors include, but are not limited to, industry consolidation, major issues of quality and manufacturing challenges, changes to inventory and distribution practices, difficulty in producing a given drug, production delays, discontinuations for business reasons, unanticipated increased demand, and shortages of underlying raw materials. These are some of the causes, but more importantly, we at the department are trying to focus now on finding solutions that protect patients. In 1999, the FDA formed the Drug Shortage Program within CDER in an effort to proactively begin monitoring and mitigating, that is, lessening the impact of potential and actual drug shortages. And when the FDA becomes aware of any potential shortage, it works collaboratively with the affected firm to return the product to its usual market availability as quickly and as safely as possible, while striving to prevent any harm to any patient. Although the FDA cannot require firms to continue production of a product or increase production in response to a shortage, it does encourage other firms to do so. FDA also expedites the review of submissions from manufacturers, which may include requests to extend the expiration date of products, increase capacity, use a new raw material source, license new manufacturers, and permit changes in product specifications. The FDA is committed to working with drug manufacturers to prevent shortages whenever possible. And in fact, as a direct result of this commitment and the work of the FDA drug shortages staff and experts from across the agency, last year, 2010, 38 shortages were prevented. And so far for 2011, this year, I am pleased to report for the first time that 99 shortages have been prevented. Also, at the same time, the FDA goes to great lengths to mitigate shortages, that is, lessening the impact when they occur. One notable recent example involves the well-described shortage of the drug cytarabine used to treat certain types of acute leukemia. Crystal formation in the vials of this drug represented a quality and manufacturing problem that led to a disruption in production and a shortage that received tremendous publicity across the nation within recent months. In this case, the FDA worked with the manufacturer, found that if the vials were warm, the crystals would dissolve and the drug could be then safely administered to the patient. And as a result of this collaboration, the manufacturer was then subsequently able to ship the vials to healthcare professionals, along with a letter from the FDA notifying them to inspect for crystal formation and, if present, warm the vials to dissolve the crystals. And in this way, the collaboration led to ensuring and upholding patient safety. So as a result of this work, we can report today that this drug shortage, this well-reported drug shortage, has been recently resolved. In limited circumstances, the FDA can allow the temporary importation of critical drugs when a shortage cannot be resolved immediately. However, there are several factors that limit the applicability of this option. The product may already be in short supply abroad, so importation to the U.S. could exacerbate the shortage. FDA must also ensure that drugs imported from abroad are manufactured in a facility that meets FDA quality standards. So to discuss these and other possible solutions, the FDA will be hosting a public meeting next Monday, September 26th. And this meeting is being held to gain additional insight about causes and impact of this challenge and possible strategies for solutions. Then on Friday, September 30th, the FDA is conducting a webinar for the general public, and this is an opportunity for people to learn more about what the FDA is doing to address this challenge. And it will also be a venue for citizens to ask questions directly to FDA experts who are working on this topic every day. Although I have focused my comments till now on the FDA, I should stress that the entire Department of Health and Human Services has been fully engaged on this topic for quite some time. We view this as a pressing public health challenge, and we want to resolve this on behalf of the department and indeed the entire country. This past summer, I personally convened a series of meetings with representatives from FDA, NCI, our National Cancer Institute, the CDC, our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, and others. We have joined together as one department to explore more deeply the root causes of this problem and the possible steps that can be taken to address them. These have been productive meetings, and we pledge to continue them until the problem is solved. We look for as many ways as possible to maximize our efforts within the department to protect the public health. Also, earlier this month, Secretary Sebelius, along with other senior leaders in the department, hosted a meeting with over a dozen representatives from pharmaceutical manufacturers, professional medical organizations, hospitals, insurance companies, group purchasing entities, and patient advocacy organizations. And this crucial meeting gave us firsthand insight into these challenges, generated a good discussion with the stakeholders, and also served as a foundation for our future collaboration. Shortly, later on this fall, the FDA will release a report which reflects an even more detailed analysis of the problem and updated recommendations for the future. Potential solutions are being examined. One suggestion is a mechanism for manufacturers to report impending supply disruptions and discontinuation of drugs, which could help to curb shortages and improve the continuity of the drug supply. The sooner the FDA learns of a drug shortage, the more effective it can be in helping to notify providers and the public in upholding patients' safety. So we remain committed to working with all parties, manufacturers, providers, patient advocates, and other stakeholders to help minimize and solve this problem. So in conclusion, the department is committed to addressing and solving this critical public health challenge. It is our goal to advance this dialogue with all interested parties, both internal and external, and we also recognize and deeply respect the important roles of the members of Congress, and we welcome the opportunity to discuss this important topic with you today. So thank you very much, and Dr. Queter and I will be very happy now to take any questions you may have.
Chair, thanks. The gentleman, Dr. Crow, why have drug shortages increased so much in the last few years?
Well, again, there's no one single reason, but there are changes here that we are seeing in the backdrop of an economic and business climate that's leading to market consolidation, a complicated manufacturing process that's being conducted increasingly in aging facilities. This is leading to quality and manufacturing issues, as we have heard now. Sometimes products are discontinued for business reasons. Oftentimes, the production of any of these agents is a complicated process. So all these factors converge to create the issue that we're facing right now.
Have other countries experienced shortages such as we have?
Unfortunately, the United States is not unique in this situation, and yes, we are indeed seeing similar situations in other countries around the world.
And when a shortage occurs in another developing country, how is that situation resolved there?
Well, we want to learn more from our colleagues there. I don't know if Dr. Queter wants to say more about that particular issue.
We are often contacted by our regulatory colleagues from other countries, looking to collaborate on finding solutions particularly when there are worldwide problems. Different countries have different ways of producing drug, of assuring production of product, but we work as much as possible with others to try and make sure that shortages are limited and mitigated.
Does Europe have a particular method of resolving this situation?
I believe the method in Europe is pretty much similar to ours, particularly since they have multiple countries. They seek other sources of supply from other countries.
And do you know what is causing these drug shortages in these countries in Europe?
Many of them are the same sorts of things. Many of these products are marketed globally. They're not just in the U.S. The sources of the drug substance itself most of them are foreign sources. So if there's an interruption of a source in the U.S. at a U.S. plant, if a source in another country, if a manufacturer in another country has the same source, they'll be in the same situation, and everyone will be out looking for alternatives at the same time.
Okay, Dr. Queter, what specific steps has the FDA taken to prevent or alleviate drug shortages?
First, we tend to learn about in terms of preventing drug shortages. When companies let us know that they are experiencing a problem, it is usually a problem in production. Sometimes it's a business decision to discontinue a product. When they inform us in advance that that's the case, we work very closely with them to understand the problem and assess whether the shortage would be something that would be critical for patients. So, for example, if a company is making a product that 20 other companies make, that's not likely to be a critical public health situation. But particularly for these sterile injectables, that's usually not the case. So we will work with the company to help them develop solutions to fix the problem and avoid an interruption in production. That is not always possible. It's just simply not always possible. When it's not possible and it looks like the company may have to interrupt production, we go to other manufacturers and we talk to them about their capacity to increase their production. They usually can't turn that around on a dime, but we work with them to facilitate ramping up in order to supply the market with usual sources. If it requires, we'll work, and with the original company that's having a problem, we have a number of tools in our kit that we can use to help them address the problem. Dr. Koh gave you an example of the kinds of things that we can do in some cases, to look at the end product itself. If there's a problem with the end product itself, in that case it was crystallization of the actual active drug. And we worked with the company. They got right on the case to figure out why those crystals were forming, what could be done to mitigate that, inform providers, And since then, the crystal problem has been fixed.
Do you feel you need earlier warning than you currently have?
We can always use earlier notification. There certainly are circumstances where things happen and very, very unexpectedly. But the majority of cases of shortages we could have been notified, and in the majority of cases, we are not notified in advance. It's getting better. I will say it is getting better. But we still have a large percentage of actual shortages where we were not aware that it was coming.
Thank you. My time has expired. The Chair recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to initially ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the testimony of the National Coalition for Cancer Research. I think you have a copy of it.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Coe, I mean, we all agree that drug shortages are the real problem, are a real problem facing the country, and from what I understand, it's actually getting worse. But I guess it's hard to figure out, at least for me, what the cause is. And I'd like to ask, some questions about the root cause of the problem. The FDA has said that in 2010, last year, over half of the shortages were due to manufacturing and product quality issues. And I understand, I think you mentioned that many or a majority of those are sterile injectable drugs. Why would these drugs be prone to manufacturing and product quality issues in particular?
Well, many of these products are the result of a long production process, and those production processes are now occurring in fewer manufacturing sites because of industry consolidation. There's also aging of the facilities where this work is ongoing. There are business and economic factors in the background that are lowering the profit margin. So oftentimes businesses will make a decision to perhaps discontinue a particular product for business reasons. And as a result, we are seeing the quality of manufacturing issues, Congressman, that you are referring to. So some of these quality issues are quite disturbing, where we literally are tracking products that have particulate matter, even pieces of glass and pieces of metal in what should be sterile products that are injected into patients. So this is the reason why the FDA continues to uphold this mission of safe and effective drugs, also high-quality drugs in the middle of this challenging environment.
Now, Teva is on the next panel, but in their written testimony, they state that it takes 2 or 3 years to get FDA approval for a new supplier for ingredients or an alternate, I should say, manufacturing site. Is that really true? Does it really take 2 or 3 years to get the FDA approval, and why would that be if it is true? And does it take that long if there's a drug shortage issue involved?
Well, let me start, and I'm sure Dr. Queter can add. One of the advances of the FDA in this situation is to prioritize generic drug applications, expedite and accelerate approval in every way possible, particularly if the public health is threatened. So there are efforts to try to advance that time frame. That's also the goal of the Generic Drug User Fee Act, which is under review right now. So these are issues that are very important to the FDA, and they take it seriously.
But, I mean, is that time period that Teva mentioned, I mean, would that generally be true? And is there any kind of flexibility that you have to expedite review and inspections of new facilities so they could address the shortage when it exists?
There absolutely is flexibility, and we do that routinely when we are aware that, say, a new facility is needed or a new supplier is needed, and when there is a circumstance that might lead to a potential shortage of an important medical product. We do it routinely. We can often turn things around in a matter of weeks.
But I mean, you haven't answered that 2 or 3 year time span.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. The 2 or 3 year time span is what is being referred to under usual conditions when a company when there is not a shortage situation,
but if
not a shortage situation
but if there
pending.
is, then you deal with it quicker.
Absolutely. But even the 2 to 3 year time frame, as Dr. Koh said, we are working and we're happy to see that there's been agreement on generic user fees that will change that and make that a matter of months and not years.
I mean, my concern is, we face these extraordinary fiscal pressures. The House-passed budget for FDA contained a 21% cut in appropriated funds. I mean, is this cut, would that adversely affect your ability to work with companies to avoid or mitigate shortages? And, I know you mentioned generics. Are you negotiating with the generic industry to develop a user fee? And can that help prevent or alleviate drug shortages? Just about the funding now. We are
negotiating and have reached agreement with the generic industry about user fees, and that'll be coming up for discussion by yourself, within the next year.
What about this House budget cut?
As far as there is no question that resources matter, and it takes. These are not automated processes. They take people with judgment and knowledge, and having enough people makes a big difference.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. And I'd like to request the following statements to be entered into the record. I think you have copies. The statement of the National Community Pharmacists Association, the letter from the American Society for Hematology to the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health, and the statement of the Generic Pharmaceutical Association.
I have no objection, no.
All right,
We have
without objection, so ordered. Recognize this time gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think all would agree that resources matter in this tough fiscal period, as the ranking member said. I think also part of our issue will be prioritization, and especially in life-saving issues, and what are agencies doing to put first things first, and what can they do to obviously redirect funds in a different direction. For Dr. Koch, going on in line with my opening statement, how have cost and payment factors impacted these drug shortages?
Well, again, this is an industry that's producing products in an environment where they are facing increasing economic pressures. The profit margin for any particular agent is declining for them. So they have to make business decisions, but also keep their products moving until the decision is made, perhaps to discontinue a product or another. Throwing in the quality and manufacturing issues and possibly delay issues in what's often a complicated production process, it just all contributes to the situation that we're seeing now.
And who are the big payers?
Well, there's a process where purchasers, hospitals and physicians and providers buy these products, but there are also group purchasing organizations and pharmacy benefit managers who are involved who are trying to drive down the price for understandable business reasons. So these are all the stakeholders who are involved in the purchasing chain.
And I do appreciate your opening testimony. We had some series of questions, and really you answered them in your opening statement, which was, and I'm just going to highlight. One of the things was a question we were going to ask was closely collaborating, and you gave the example of the drug with the crystallization. I thought that was very, very helpful. The other issue that I was going to focus on was alternative sponsors, and that's where you talked about maybe temporary easing import restrictions or importation, or I can't even read my writing, temporarily doing something else. But you said that's constrained based upon if there is a shortage overseas of the same product, which and something that we've talked about over the past years and with Ranking Member Dingo is the ability to make sure that the drugs that we're importing are inspected by our inspector, so we know the efficacy and the safety of that. Right. I've always been a risk-based person, saying on the focus point of saying that those that are more questionable facilities ought to get a lot of look. If they have been operating safely and they've been inspected like a U.S. facility every year, then it might make that you could go every 2 years or maybe every 18 months. And that's the whole issue of shifting sources, too, from the more critical elements and safety versus known products and industries that you all have real confidence in. We wouldn't expect you to do that to industries that have a poor record, but those who are, you have really good confidence in. That's the funding issue. You also mentioned, business reasons and aging facilities, and I think you mentioned increased regulations. Is that part of your testimony?
Well, the standards, the quality standards that the FDA puts forward in areas like this have been unchanged for the last 4 decades. And in fact, the FDA has really gone the extra mile, in my view, to show tremendous regulatory flexibility here. So again, since we can't require any manufacturer to do much of anything, all we can ask is for information, communication, collaboration, and then the FDA shows maximum regulatory flexibility. This rewarming of the cytarabine that I mentioned to you is one example. Filtering out particulate matter, so again, that these medications can be used and not put aside is another example.
Yeah, and I only have 12 seconds
Sure.
left, and I wanted to focus on, I'll go back to the statement, the testimony, because I did scribble a note, something of comment on increased regs, and I'll have to go back and look at that. But why doesn't the shortage of a product in this sector then send a increased price signal to manufacturers for them to then produce the good?
Well, we have come to learn that the standard economic principles of supply and demand.
And the question is, why is that distorted? I think that's the basic fundamental question of this problem. What has distorted the fundamental principles of supply and demand? And my time's expired, but I think that's the heart of this issue. I yield back my time.
Would you like to respond?
Sure, and I'm sure Dr. Queter can add too. First of all, these agreements are made often through these long-term contracts, and so also this whole process involves multiple stakeholders, especially and including the pharmacy benefit managers and the group purchasing organizations. So it complicates this environment and sort of does not make relevant the sort of standard supply and demand economic principles that we'd see in other businesses. Dr. Queter? Yep.
I would say, you've said what I would say. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen, and recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too am sponsor of the DeGette legislation that would ask for early notification. Just wanted to mention we actually have a Chicago-based injectable drug company, Hespera, that has endorsed the bill, and they already do many of the things, including proactively reporting to the FDA about potential drug shortages. You've explained, Dr. Coe and Dr. Queter, the advantage of that early notification. Let me just raise a question that some have raised, that early warning could exacerbate the problem and lead to hoarding of critical drugs. Is this anything we need to watch out for, account for? I'm hoping that is not the result of this legislation, obviously, which I support. Have you heard of that? Is that?
I'll respond to that question. When we are notified of a potential shortage, we do not automatically turn around and put that on our website and notify the public of a potential shortage that might do exactly, which would have the opposite effect of what we want. We judge very carefully when is the right time to make a public announcement about a potential shortage. First, we assess what are we talking about? Is this a true product shortage, or is it an imbalance in distribution? Because sometimes you see things that seem to be in shortage in one part of the country, but there's plenty of it and more so in another part. So we take that potential for making things worse very, very seriously. We, meanwhile, are working on it to assess it and assess what we might do to mitigate it if it is real. If it is real, we usually announce the fact that it exists and try to let the public know what we are doing to try to address it.
So early notification then is something that is a very useful tool.
Right. Early notification to FDA is a very useful tool. We see that as different than early publication.
Got it. Let me ask you this. The FDA has limited authorities. Let me run through some of those. Cannot, at this point, you can't require manufacturers to do this early notification. You have no authority to require companies to increase production of a drug during a shortage. You can't impose an allocation plan when a shortage causes life-threatening conditions, and FDA has limited ability to post timely information on its website for healthcare professionals and patients regarding reasons for shortages and timelines for resolution. I don't really understand that one, but are there, in addition to early notification, are there other authorities that you need that would help mitigate this problem?
I think the most important thing, there are two things. One, in the early notification is something that helps us in the mitigation and prevention greatly. What we need to be able to do is we need to be able to have the industry assure that they are making a quality product and upholding their responsibility to produce high-quality products where these things won't happen. Our goal is to prevent even the potential for a shortage from occurring. Not always possible. In the case of many of these threatened and real shortages, these are, as Dr. Koh said, these are in plants that manufacture multiple products. If you look at the record, the things that led to the actual problem with production are things that we have been telling the companies about in routine inspections for years, but only became critical, that they needed to address these, modernize, so that they could continue producing quality product without a glitch. So that's first and foremost from our standpoint, assuring that we are aware so that we can step in and use every possible communication tool and flexibility and regulatory actions.
Let me just ask you, to what extent is the issue of business decisions? What percent of those cases where we have shortages would you say this is a business decision?
I can't give you an exact percentage. I'll be happy to provide that.
Is it a major issue, and is there anything that we can do about that?
I would say that it is not, in the case, that is not the major issue.
Okay.
I would say by far and away, the more common scenario has something to do with manufacturing and product quality.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you for being here.
Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Recognize the gentleman from Kentucky for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thanks. Thank you for being here. I was going to follow up a little bit on Congressman Shimkus. I mean, you answered a lot of the questions in your opening testimony. But I had a group of oncologists in the other day. So these aren't people that make drugs. These aren't people that sell drugs. People that are FDA issues or whatever you want to. These are guys just are taking care of patients. And they say they literally have to make choices about who they take care of because they don't have the drugs available. So I asked kind of the questions that, well, I can't believe a company won't make them if you have the demand for them. And they told me that this particular type of drugs, the generic, are priced different in the federal government. So the Medicare actually has prices these different than other drugs. Was that what they were saying was true, or?
Well, I can start with that. And first of all, Congressman, thank you again for your attention to the patient. This is a dire situation for patients, and I have actually trained in cancer as well as other fields, so this is very personally and professionally important to me. We have a role of Medicare here that reimburses according to what's called the average sales price. So that is one factor here, but we don't view that as a significant issue in driving the shortages that we're seeing here.
But these generics are a different system than others because what we're seeing is, and you mentioned that pharmacy benefit managers, all these are driving down drug costs. Well, they're doing it if, you know, a pharma benefit manager trying to do all drug costs.
Sure.
But we seem to see this particular class of drugs having a bigger problem than others. And the only thing I can see that's different is that the way the federal government treats them, they treat them different than other drugs.
These are, I'm not sure I can answer your question, but these are generic drugs. They are off patent for the most part. You know, there are some that, so they're at a point in time where the profit margin for the drugs generally, because they are generic and you can have multiple manufacturers, is lower.
Right.
And it wouldn't be just, you mentioned Medicare, CMS, but there are other group purchasers, many other group purchasers. Some of them are government related, others are private insurance companies that are negotiating in bulk, basically, for prices. And they're no different than what the federal government does. It's the same.
But why isn't that happening in other classes? I mean, this seems to be particularly more than others.
Well, in the other classes, in the non-generic world, there's one source. And so they're in a great bargaining position because they are a sole source, the innovator product. They have a patent.
But they are priced down. I mean, there is a different system for
Sure.
generic drugs and Medicare.
They tend to be priced lower.
Priced lower.
Absolutely, and that, of course, is the advantage that's the access point for the public.
But the issue, I mean, if you have lower costs, which we all want to drive lower costs. Believe me, we're all trying to save them. But you have lower costs, then you get less supply, as you're saying, because the price is lower, and you have less quality people producing. And so, is there not it appears there's not, according to the oncologist, not a mechanism where if you just pay just a little bit more, you're going to get the drug that's going to take care of it. You know, they're not talking. There's not a price mechanism to say we've got a low supply that Congressman Shimkus is talking about. Therefore, if we can adjust the price, we get the supply that we need to take care of patients.
The situation is, as summarized by Dr. Queter, but Congressman, I think you are raising some interesting points where we can get you more information and work with you.
Because whatever we can do, I mean, the things that you mentioned, business decisions, and that's all part of the mix, but there's some things we can do from this side.
Thank you.
And one other thing, just quickly, on the FDA, the 2 to 3 years, you said now you got the flexible teams. Is that relatively new? Because I was talking, because of this issue after these oncologists said that, I reached out to some people, and they did talk about some issues with inspection time that Congressman Shimkus. So it sounds like it's being addressed. But I don't know if it
absolutely is being addressed. It absolutely is being addressed.
Maybe just hear from the ones who have the worst experiences, I guess. But that's good, because I understand you, because of this issue, I know with your physicians and the oncologists I met, you don't take care of patients. So we appreciate your attitude and moving forward to do so. So thank you, and I yield back.
Chair, thanks the gentleman, and now recognizes the chair, the ranking member emeritus of the full committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingle, for 5 minutes for questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your courtesy, and thank you for holding this hearing. Let me begin by asking this question, yes or no. Do you have authority at FDA or at HHS to waive any of the requirements with regard to efficacy, good manufacturing practices, or safety? Yes or no? In the event of shortage?
Yes.
You do have it?
We have the authority to use flexibility in how we implement the regulations.
Okay.
Regulatory discretion.
I would like to have a further answer on that particular point.
But the requirements are the same. How one reaches them is flexible.
Okay. I'd like to have further statement on that for the record so we can understand what your authority there is. It's my understanding that the FDA has been working to address shortages of medically necessary drugs. Can you please define what medically necessary means, please?
Medically necessary is defined as a product used to treat or prevent a serious disease or condition for which there's no other product available to act as a substitute.
I believe you've indicated in your testimony that the vast majority of shortages experienced in the United States is attributable to sterile injectables. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And according to your testimony, the majority, some 54% of these shortages were due to product quality issues such as particulates, microbial contamination, impurities, stability changes resulting in crystallization. Is that right?
That's right, Congressman.
Were you finding those in American pharmaceuticals or imports?
We're finding them here in the United States.
What about imports?
Well, those are exactly the issues we try to prevent, which is why importing is always a challenging issue. And
I
in
understand,
fact,
but you have really no authority to address the question of the manufacturing practices abroad. You have no real authority to deal with good manufacturing practices. You have no real authority to see to it that the requirements that are imposed on American manufacturers for safety, efficacy are there, and you have very little power to effectively inspect those foreign manufacturers either of finished pharmaceutical products or components and constituents, right?
that's correct, Congressman.
And you have no ability really to know who's manufacturing these things or to trace them through the product line. Is that right?
That's right. That's why the importation process is done very carefully and selectively.
I've got some legislation to address that, and I hope that we'll be shortly addressing it here in this committee. I have a bill, as I mentioned, that would address the problem of quality problems in drug manufacturing process by requiring the drug manufacturers implement an effective quality system that complies with GMP. The quality system would also be required to ensure risk management procedures that would address all relevant factors through the supply chain, including original source materials, their origin, on-site audits, and methods to detect or exclude potentially risky substances. Do you believe that enactment of such manufacturers would also have to maintain records and establish that the drug was manufactured and distributed under conditions that ensured its identity, strength, quality, and purity? Would legislation of this kind help you address quality issues?
Yes, tracking quality every step of the way would certainly uphold patient safety.
This is a matter on which I've worked with the gentleman, my colleague, Mr. Shimkus. Now, it's been widely reported that when information becomes public about a drug shortage, an active gray market tries to sell drugs in short supplies to pharmacists or hospitals. Does this present a safety concern?
Yes, it does, Congressman.
Why and how and what can you do about it?
Well, this is largely unregulated. The Federal Trade Commission is involved to some degree, but unfortunately...
They don't have the expertise that you have, and would you submit to us a proper answer informing me what we have to do to address that particular problem?
I'd be happy to do that. Mm-hmm.
Now, when drugs are purchased in the gray market, do we know if these drugs have been stored properly to ensure effectiveness, whether the drugs have been diluted or whether the drugs are free of filth, contaminants, or adulterates? Yes or no?
No. Unfortunately, we know very little about the products in the gray market.
Now, as I mentioned, I have a bill that would require manufacturers to maintain records establishing where the drug and its raw materials were produced, including all information relative to producers, manufacturers, distributors, and importers. Would such legislation and such power assist Food and Drug in assuring the safety of these kinds of pharmaceuticals? Yes or no?
Yes, we want to uphold safety and quality, so thank you.
At the end of the day, American consumers and patients are facing three problems. One, are the drugs they need available and affordable? Two, are the drugs they need safe? And three, are they efficacious? Do they work? I believe the committee needs to examine these issues carefully and swiftly. Our colleagues in the Senate, Mr. Harkin and Mr. Enzi, have already called on Food and Drug to improve its oversight of the pharmaceutical supply chain. I would hope this committee would follow suit, but I would like to have you give us a statement of what authorities you need to adequately carry that out. I don't believe that sending you a letter asking you to do something that for which you have no authority works. Would you submit, please, for the record, because my time is out, what it is has to be done to give you the authority to address those problems?
I'd be happy to, Congressman. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your courtesy. Ask unanimous consent that the responses be inserted in the record when received.
Without objection, so ordered. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen, and recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Dr. Cassidy, for 5 minutes for questions.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, you can keep it.
Now, you do have the ability to import from overseas, obviously, and so and there was issues raised regarding adequacy of quality control, if you will. We think of heparin from China causing many deaths, correct? One of the issues that was raised here in a previous hearing was that the inspectors, as part of their union contract, are not can refuse to go overseas. And so I think Mr. Pallone spoke about inadequate resources, but the issue was that here there's enough money to inspect, or a requirement to inspect a pharmaceutical every 2 years, and there it's happening only every 9. And when I asked, could we just redirect resources to send that person over to maybe alleviate some of these by expanding importation, the point was that the unions would not allow this to occur. They had the right to refuse the overseas assignment. Is that true, and to what extent is that limiting our ability to approve the APIs? I forget the acronym, but you know what I'm speaking of.
There we are. In the terms of a shortage situation, that has not been a big issue. For the most part, when we have a circumstance where some inspection activity is necessary in order to prevent a drug shortage, we find that our staff are extremely cooperative and willing to roll up their sleeves and step in. We are addressing the issue of our inspection force more broadly, in parallel to this, but it has not been a critical issue in mitigating or preventing drug shortages.
But there's a heck of a lot of generics being manufactured in India and other third world countries. So are they just not producing the ones that we are in short supply of, or are we just not confident of the quality of the product which they produce?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So is there a worldwide supply of drugs that are currently in shortage here? It's just that we are not trusting the manufacturing process by which they are produced, and therefore do not allow their importation.
I would say the lack of allowal of an imported to import a product has been unusual. If there is a foreign source, we are usually able to work through and get it approved. There have certainly been circumstances where there have been important problems that would prevent that, but in most cases, if there is a foreign source and going to a foreign source is necessary, we are able to work through that.
Okay. There, in the gentleman who's going to testify from TIVA, he speaks about how DEA has a quota for controlled products, and that if somebody goes out of business, that quota might not necessarily be assigned to another manufacturer, and so that you have a kind of centrally planned economy-induced shortage. Any comment on that and any way that we can address that?
I can start. I know that controlled substances represent only a very small part of the drug shortage situation that we're talking about. So we do work with DEA, but it's limited only to several instances, and Dr. Queter might add more.
And it is more complicated. Having the DEA involved for obviously good reasons does create an additional step and complicates this. But we work closely with the DEA when a controlled substance shortage is at issue.
And but I understand that, but is there any plans to make it so that if somebody stops producing, their quota is transferred to someone who would? Because I gather that's not the situation now. And although we're working closely, that's an obvious solution that I'm not sure is being implemented from your statement.
We are continuing to try and figure out how to expedite these kinds of issues with DEA, and I don't have an answer for you about exactly when that will be resolved, but we are committed to doing it, as are they.
Okay. Tiva also mentioned, just because I like to read what the other panelists say, so I refer to this, that the, I'll quote, speaking of a source of an active pharmaceutical ingredient, they say that the qualification process to identify a supplier for such can be very onerous. To qualify and gain FDA approval for a new API supplier or alternative manufacturing site for an already approved supplier can take as long as 2 to 3 years. Okay. Now, I am channeling my inner Tiva, wherever Tiva is. I've just, you don't have to testify anymore. But what would be your response to that?
Again, these are areas where we're trying to show as much regulatory flexibility as possible to accelerate approvals when necessary. So we're hoping to address these themes through the maximum flexibility possible.
And we already do. Whenever there's an issue related to a supplier, with where it requires FDA to approve a new supplier or even a new facility. I think that was one of the other concerns. We turn those around very, very quickly.
And
these are not business in a matter of weeks to months. Weeks to months. These are not business as usual where there is a long wait time. We understand that patients are at the end of this line, and we need to do everything possible to get on the case and work with the companies. And we've done that with Teva.
Okay, I yield back. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Recognize the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Matheson, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your yielding time to me, and I appreciate you holding this hearing. I think we've established the problem. I'm sure lots of people have talked about circumstances in their district. I represent the University of Utah. They project more than 360 products having shortages, and that many products by the end of this year. And I was at the Huntsman Cancer Institute just 2 weeks ago, and they were talking to me about the challenges they're facing. So I guess everybody up here has a story, but I thought I would tell you it's in my backyard as well. I was wondering if you could address for me some of the concerns about gray market activity as a result of these drug shortages and the integrity of what's out there in terms of quality of the medications, if they're counterfeit, or how we can address some of these challenges of a gray market in these medications that have shortages.
Well, I can start, and first of all, thank you, Congressman, for your commitment to research. We didn't say explicitly, but we can say now that this drug shortage issue is dramatically affecting clinical trials as well in cancer and infectious disease in many parts of NIH. So that's very, very troubling to us as a nation that prizes scientific advances. The gray market, unfortunately, is very poorly understood, and it's, as we've mentioned already, it's largely unregulated. And to have now this dimension complicating an already complicated situation is very disturbing. So we appreciate your attention to that, and we want to address that as well as all the other factors that are involved here.
Are there actions we should be taking on addressing the gray market specifically, or should we really just be addressing on the underlying problem of the shortage of these medications? Is that the more viable way to address? That would eliminate the gray market problem, I guess, if we don't have shortage.
One of the questions that was asked previously was about what we know about the products that appear on this gray market.
Right.
Do we understand when they expired, where they came from, and are they made by the company that is experiencing the shortage, or are they counterfeit products? Right. We don't, because we don't have a tracking system for within the drug supply to know what product comes from where.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll do my 30-second advertisement. I just introduced with Mr. Belbray this week our track and trace legislation, our pedigree legislation for maintaining integrity of drug supply in this country. We're operating our rules that were created in 1988, and the world has changed. I think this country, this is getting beyond the topic of this hearing, but I do think there's just too much money on the table for the counterfeiters in terms of the U.S. pharmaceutical marketplace, and I hope this committee can take a look at that legislation that Mr. Bilbray and I've introduced, because I do think it's an important safety factor for the integrity of our supply chain in general. I appreciate you coming here for this hearing. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen, and recognize the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, for 5 minutes for questions.
I want to thank our witnesses for being here, and as you know, some of us arrived a little bit late. We did have the Solyndra oversight hearing going on downstairs, so we completed that one before coming up, but we are grateful that you're here, and our second panel of witnesses we're also looking forward to, and I'm glad we've got a Tennessean on that panel who will be joining us. Just a couple of questions. As you can see, we're going to look at how we address this issue, and having you here helps to inform our decision-making process. So a couple of things I would like to know, and if you don't have the answer for me, please submit it to us so that we can include it in our record. I wanted to see if each of you had any examples where you had worked closely and collaboratively with your agencies, with manufacturers of drugs where there was a known or a projected shortage, and see if you could articulate what that process was, the interface that transpired there. And if you have those examples now, please go ahead and give them, and if not, we will accept those in writing.
So, Congresswoman, I can repeat the example that we're very proud to share actually here for the first time that had to do with cytarabine, which is a life-saving drug used for acute leukemia. And this shortage received tremendous national publicity and represented a dire challenge for cancer patients. And so when the FDA worked with the industry on this particular drug, they found that one of the issues complicating the production was the crystallization of the drug in the solution, and that rewarming it would restore the safety features that would allow infusion into patients. So with that collaboration between the FDA and industry, that issue has now been recently resolved, and we're very, very pleased to report that. And I know my colleague has other examples.
I'd actually like to expand on that one because before the issue of the crystals in the vials, where the cytarabine shortage began was it was being made predominantly, it was being made by 3 companies, but it was being made, the majority of the supply was by one firm. They were experiencing significant production delays. So what FDA did was we contacted the other manufacturers to work with them to increase their production in order to be able to supply the market. In the course of them increasing their production and trying to produce product rapidly, the crystallization occurred in both facilities. Then came in so that preceded the crystals. We then resolved that activity as well. So in that case, we also, when there was concern about whether we would find a solution to the crystallization, we also investigated alternative manufacturers, whether there were any overseas. We were not able to identify any alternative manufacturers. They were all U.S. firms.
Let me interject there. Do you have examples other than this one? Are there examples where you worked with some of those alternative manufacturers and brought them into the fold? And then once you identify that there is a near shortage that is approaching, do you think there is a way through the production process or the compensation model to provide incentives so that you have a more predictable supply?
Well, another example that we can provide for you, Congresswoman, has to do with propofol, which is an agent that's used in anesthesia. And when those shortages started occurring, the FDA could facilitate temporary importation of a substitute agent to help ameliorate that situation. So that's yet another example, and I know the FDA has many others. The economic issues here are so complex that offering any economic solution really requires first a careful analysis, and we're trying to do more of that, especially through our Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, and we hope we can come out with some more definitive recommendations for you in that area in the near future.
Thank you. We appreciate that, and in the interest of time, I'll yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentlelady, and recognize the gentlelady. Ms. Myrick for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all of our witnesses for being here. I was also at another hearing, so I'm sorry I missed your testimony and some of the questions. Like everybody else, our area is experiencing the same problems, and our doctors, we meet with them constantly, but particularly in anesthesiology and oncology, as you well know, we have the same problems. And it is scary from the standpoint of what could happen with somebody if they're given another drug that really doesn't either work or they're, have a reaction to it or something. So we hope, and thank you very much for any efforts in trying to get to the bottom of it. And I wanted to ask if really the consolidation that's taken place in the drug industry over the last few years and continues to take place, what effect or how does that contribute to the problem that we're seeing today? I mean, is this a large contributing factor because of fewer manufacturers available?
Thank you, Congressman, for your interest and support. And yes, we view industry consolidation as one of the driving root causes here. And as you can imagine, if your denominator of available manufacturers shrinks and then any one of them has a manufacturing problem or delay, it really puts the onus on the others. And if the others don't happen to produce that that product, and if this particular company is a sole source producer, then you have the ramifications that we're seeing right now. So there's no doubt that industry consolidation has contributed to this.
So what, if any, recommendations do you have of how we get over this hump? Because, you know, you mentioned the generics, which we're all very much aware of, and the fact that they aren't as popular to do because of the cost factors and other things that have entered into it. I mean, what is it that you think we should be doing or looking at to try and get to the bottom of how we can help with this?
Well, we again want to stress the importance of communication and early notification, because that will help all parties to work together. And as the number of industries involved shrinks, we want to really maximize our communication with those manufacturers, and we're doing so as we speak. And then, as Dr. Queter mentioned, we also want to have more assurances that the products that are being produced have high quality, so that we don't run into these quality and manufacturing issues. So those are two themes that would be very helpful to us.
And you find the companies work well with you?
We've had excellent dialogue to date, and we want to do much more of that, not just the FDA, but the entire department, and also engage the public in this, as you have heard.
Thank you. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentlelady and recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Dr. Murphy, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, and I thank this distinguished panel. We appreciate your concern for our citizens of this country. A couple of areas here. Are you meeting with the manufacturers? And I want to ask a couple questions to find out here with regard to what are some of the causes of this drug shortage. You've laid out a number of these things very well. Thank you. But let's say, for example, cancer drugs. Why the shortages with cancer drugs? We know they're very expensive in many cases. What specifically is the reason for that?
Well, it's very distressing, Congressman, to see some of these time-honored, life-saving medications now being caught in the middle of this public health crisis. And some of the agents that we have mentioned here, cytarabine, vincristine, bleomycin, time-honored agents that have been shown to be effective for decades are now stuck in these shortages. So again, these are older, generic, sterile injectable drugs that are typical of the ones that are being
but can I ask them specific things? Do we not have enough manufacturers, for example, working on these things? Is that part of the problem?
That's part of the problem, again, because the industry has consolidated, and so we don't have the dozens and dozens.
Of those who are there, are they not working at capacity? Do we know if that's an issue?
I'm not sure I can address that directly.
I think that what often happens in a lot of these companies, they make dozens of products.
Mm-hmm.
These sterile injectables can only be made in certain types of facilities, so there are a limited number of those. And because of the market and the few number of producers, there is pressure to produce and continually produce. And so maintenance of the facilities themselves is often put off because it requires an investment on these low profit margin.
But very expensive, but low profit margin?
Right. Some of them are not terribly expensive, but low profit margin. So there is...
That's important what you just said. So this is one of the concerns we have. Certainly we want medication to be affordable. I mean, why window shop when you can't afford? But in our push to make sure that drugs are affordable, are we also tripping over ourselves? Is it hurting the patients when we say we want there to be such a low profit margin that it ends up backfiring and we don't end up with the medications to save lives? Is that part of our policy that's getting in the way for us?
Well, thank you for posing those questions. And obviously, ultimately, our goal is to protect the patient and give timely delivery of life-saving medication.
Is that something, though, that, and even if you don't have information today, is that something that you could advise us on? I'm looking for anything kind of politics in this. I really want to know from the standpoint of myself as a healthcare provider, if we're doing something that is saying we want drugs to be affordable, but we're cutting the price so much that people don't want to make them, that's a serious concern. And so my question is policy interfering. If you can't answer that today, I just want to know if you'll get back to us with that.
Sure, Congressman. Those are precisely the issues that we are wrestling with as a department and as a country. So thank you for posing that.
And I say this from the standpoint of, look, oftentimes what goes around the hill is lots of accusations in politics. We can't afford to engage in any of that on these life-saving issues. And so I'm trusting you to give us those honest answers, and I really appreciate it from one colleague to another here.
Thank you so much, Congressman.
And also, with regard to inventories, I'm hearing that hospitals saying they're having a hard time keeping their inventory. It's not an issue that they're not purchasing enough, correct? Or is it that if a hospital says we can't have some of these things in supply because it may be too expensive or too difficult for us to keep these in inventory because of special requirements for how to maintain them, how to secure them, the special conditions under which they might be, is that part of the problem too? They may not be ordering enough because for themselves it's also very expensive?
It can be. I believe that it can be a problem. There also has been a trend, and certainly not 100%, but there has been a trend in the industry to have what some people call just-in-time production.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the long lead time production that may be in certain, particularly for these sterile injectables, that there may be for other products that have longer shelf lives. So they tend to make less and distribute it out in smaller amounts, which certainly contributes to hospitals not being able to maintain a supply in addition to a large supply and cushion in addition to what the other concerns that you mentioned.
And again, that just-in-time inventory is one where they're thinking that if they also have a small margin. I mean, it's one of these things. Look, we understand healthcare is expensive. Sickness is more expensive, and we all want to work together on that. And so I do appreciate and look forward to seeing your information on this. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen, and recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. Gingrey, for 5 minutes for questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm sorry I missed a lot of your testimony, witnesses, but thank you for being here. Let me first address to Secretary Coe. In your testimony, you cite that there were 178 drug shortages in 2010, and that sterile injectable drugs make up a large and increasing share of these shortages. And by my count, roughly 132 of the 178 were for sterile injectables. Of these injectable drugs, can you tell me how many were in shortage in previous years? Has this been a long-term problem or just more recently?
This is a long-term problem, Congressman, and unfortunately the trend is going the wrong way. The shortages are increasing year by year. We have data back through at least 2006, and the trend has gotten worse since then.
And then tell me this, are there any other common characteristics that you're aware of among these 132, besides the fact that they are generic and they are sterile injectables? For instance, are these drugs typically newer generics or drugs that have been on the market for years? Actually, you just answered that, and I thank you. Well, the other thing on that is, are the profit margins typically very low, or any other issues that you might be aware of?
So on our first question, Congressman, the irony here is that these are older generic drugs that we understand are very helpful, if not life-saving, and so that to have this situation is really quite ironic and tragic. And you're right, there is an issue with respect to business forces here, and the profit margin is understood to be quite low for many of these individual products.
And my last question can go to really to either one of you, Mr. Secretary or Dr. Queter. Am I saying that correctly? Good. Help me understand something. Mr. Shimkus earlier addressed this. Many of the drugs we are talking about are these older generics, not just the sterile injectables, where the profit margins can often be very low. These low profit margins can oftentimes lead to a very little competition, or even drugs for which only one company makes the product. Ms. Shimkus raised this point about the market prices, and I understand maybe Secretary Coe, you tried to answer this for him. I just want to be clear. Do you, either one of you, have any thoughts as to why you get to the point where there's a limited number of manufacturers of a particular generic, why the prices at that point remain low? I mean, the market should be able to work, the market of supply and demand, and obviously when a brand name drug, which is very expensive, first goes generic, and you have several manufacturers jumping in and producing that generic and at a much, much lower price. And then finally it gets too low for some of them to survive. They stop doing it and go on to something else, maybe another generic. And a couple or maybe even one company hangs on. It would seem because of supply and demand that company would would be able to raise their prices. Are there any government rules, regulations, laws, pharmacy benefit managers, something that would cause them not to be able to raise their prices, even though the market would certainly let them do that otherwise?
Yes, Congressman. So we have come to understand that this is a complex business situation where the standard economic principles of supply and demand do not easily apply. And we have manufacturers, we have purchasers, providers, hospitals, we have group purchasing organizations and pharmacy benefit managers. So we have multiple forces here all working to the final outcome that ordinarily you would see with a shortage, a rise in price and profit, but that doesn't apply here. So this is why we need the extra analysis that our department's doing and others, and we welcome new information and modeling to really help us understand the root causes better.
Dr. Quita?
I think the questions that you raise are exactly some of the questions that we have as we really try to understand the roots of this problem. What are the things that could be done to try and prevent these shortages from occurring or even being at risk in the first place?
Well, I thank both of you for those answers, because the federal government tries to do the right thing in many instances. I would hope in all instances, and it seems that far too much of the time they screw it up. And so that's why I ask you those questions, and I hope that you'll continue to look at that so that market forces can continue to prevail. Then I don't think we'd be faced with these shortages.
Chair, gentleman yields back. That is a round of questions for the subcommittee members. We have a couple of members of the committee who've joined us. Chair recognizes gentleman Mr. Walden for 5 minutes for questions.
I thank the chairman very much, first of all, for his recognition, since I'm not a member of the subcommittee, but also for having this hearing. And I appreciate the testimony from the two witnesses today. I got involved in this issue some time ago because of an oncology doctor in my district, Dr. Chuck Dibbs, who brought this issue to my attention, my staff's attention. And the drug specifically that I recall he mentions was, and I'll try and say this right, doxorubicin, is that right? I understand it's an ovarian cancer drug, which he has prescribed for a very long time. Apparently a very effective drug. Again, I'm not a doctor, but that's what he tells me. What was the FDA's role in interrupting the production of that drug? Can you speak to that?
I can speak to that very generally. Yeah. There were several companies that produced doxorubicin. One of them, which was the major supplier, also was the same producer for the cytarabine, Ara-C, that Dr. Coe mentioned earlier. Some of the issues were exactly the same. There were facility issues, production delays because of chronic problems in an aging facility is probably the best way to summarize it. What FDA did was we worked with the other two producers to facilitate their ability to increase production. It did take a while. They aren't, as I said, these are complex products to make. Companies can't just ramp up production overnight. Right. But in the meantime, a fourth company came in with a new version of the product and helped to make up the supply. So we made sure to expedite review of that fourth company's application and any inspections, et cetera, that were necessary in order to turn this around.
Now, Dr. Coe, do you have any comment on that?
I think Dr. Queter summarized it well.
So I guess, so you feel like you've taken all the steps, this drug is now available on the market again and without shortage? Is that accurate?
My expert tells me.
Doxorubicin
itself is. There is another version of the drug that's a sort of a special formulation that has a sole source that continues to be a problem, but again, that's a different company.
All right. Then I know
same company.
Dr. Coe, you mentioned glass and metal in injectables, I think you were discovering, which sends sort of shivers up everybody's spine. I've also heard, though, that with the new technologies, the scientists are able to see deeper into the drugs than we've ever seen before, in parts per billion or whatever. Again, this is your field, not mine. But are we looking deeper and finding things we never knew was there before, and is that really a problem from a health standard, or is it a question but may play a role?
Well, again, those examples, Congressman, are very graphic examples of quality issues that we're facing. I must say, though, that, again, the FDA has worked with companies. So in the case of particulate matter, pieces of glass, pieces of metal, first to identify the issue, but also there have been advances in developing filtering systems so we can filter those out and make those drugs then safe to inject into patients. So that's another example of regulatory flexibility that has marked this chapter of our history.
So I guess the end of my time's about to expire, but I mean my time to ask questions about to expire. Just want to clarify that for the short night. It's this sense of urgency. I applaud you for bringing people together and trying to figure this problem out. But as I'm hearing from both Dr. Dibb and others in my district, there is this, patient comes in, the drug's not available. They've been prescribing it for years. It's effective. It works, and they can't get it. I know my own mother had ovarian cancer and died from it. And so I have this just sense of patient urgency. I know you feel that, both of you, we all do. And so if there's a way we can play a constructive role here, whether it's Ms. DeGette's bill on a notification, I mean, she's put a lot of work into this. We just need to do everything we can to be a partner in this, to find a solution. I look forward to working with both of you and members of this committee to the extent they'll let me play a role. So with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Chair, thanks to gentlemen, and recognize the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. DeGette, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank my colleague from Oregon for the free commercial announcement. Mr. Chairman, thanks for letting me participate. It's good to be back in my old stomping grounds of the Health Subcommittee. And as I know you've been discussing, Congressman Rooney and I have introduced in a bipartisan way the Preserving Access to Life-Saving Medications Act, which creates an early warning system between FDA, drug companies, and providers so that we can respond to these drug shortages quickly and efficiently. Do I think that this bill will solve the root problems of the drug shortage crisis? No. But do I think it's a necessary first step? Absolutely. And I appreciate the witnesses coming here to talk to the members of this committee. This bill came up because Mr. Rooney and I independently were going around meeting with our hospitals and our doctors, and suddenly they started saying to us, I was in the middle of a chemotherapy treatment of a child, and suddenly I couldn't get the drug. And it just seemed to us that this, I'm sure it didn't happen immediately, but it seemed like it did. Doctor, you're shaking your head. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, to the prescriber, they're not following, websites. They just know that they can't get the drug, and they have a patient who is ill and needs it today or tomorrow, and not in 2 months when the supply can be re-upped, and that's a very difficult position to be in as a physician, and even worse as a patient.
And is there some reason why these shortages have increased recently? Either one of you?
We're trying to understand that. Some of the things that we have identified is that these are products that are complicated. Most of the products that have been problematic are complicated to produce.
Yeah.
There are a limited number of producers, and they are all working, many of them are working in facilities that are aging and have had chronic challenges in maintaining production. Product quality.
Yeah, and I think before I got here, Mr. Chairman, you discussed the current system, which is a reporting system for companies that don't have competition, and it's a voluntary system. Even though it's much more limited, it's really worked. In 2010, 38 drug shortages were avoided when the agency was given advance notice. And I just want to give a couple of examples. In August of 2009, Hospira notified FDA of their intention to discontinue the drug potassium phosphate in 2010 due to low volume. The drug is often critical for neonatal care. Hospira received a note back from the FDA drug shortage in September 2009 thanking them. And then in March 2011, the other supplier of potassium phosphate, American Regent, recalled its product because of a quality issue. So what happened then is in April 2011, the FDA made Hospira aware of the drug shortage caused by the recall and asked them to assess their ability to return to manufacturing. And then in that same month, Hospira told the agency that they would return to manufacturing potassium phosphate so that the patients could be served. And the FDA, and so it worked. But that's on a very limited basis. And so I just think that this could really work. And I guess I want to ask you, Dr. Cohen, in my minute remaining, how will it work if we enact legislation like this to get the information into the provider's hands that there's an impending drug shortage? Because you folks have had some experience with it.
Sure, and Congresswoman, first of all, thank you for your leadership on this issue. It's very, very much appreciated. And we all feel that establishing highest level communication as early as possible about any potential shortage can give us the opportunity all to be proactive. And that's just not FDA and HHS, but also providers and hospitals and patients. So if we can do this together, understand that a potential shortage is on the horizon as soon as possible, make that information available to relevant parties and ultimately to patients and the public, then we can all work together in a proactive way. Right now we are in a situation that you've summarized very well where the reporting is voluntary. Oftentimes the FDA does not know until too late, and then patients are stuck in this dire situation, which is just not acceptable. So we are looking forward to greater emphasis on early notification and communication.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Chair, thanks to gentlelady. Before we go to panel 2, we have one request for a follow-up. For panel 1, without objection, we'll let Dr. Cassidy ask that follow-up question.
Thank you. We had actually, my office had looked into, I think maybe vincristine, and there was a problem that we heard back from you of endotoxin being in the product, and it was unclear where in the manufacturing process that endotoxin had been introduced. Now, obviously that's an issue, and frankly, I called my constituent and I said FDA did the right thing. We don't know where the endotoxin was introduced. It's very disturbing to me that endotoxin should be in the product. We're kind of euphemistically speaking about manufacturing problems, but really they're significant. So is it a pattern when we're saying manufacturing that no, there's actually some sort of contamination such as endotoxin for which in their GMP they do not know where it's entering? Because that's a process problem that is of tremendous concern.
The answer is yes. That's exactly the kind of thing that we're concerned about. When you find end product that has endotoxin in it, the first thing one needs to do is figure out how that endotoxin is getting in there in the first place. And there are multiple steps in production where that could be occurring, but figuring it out is not easy. And it can take a very long time to determine that, and then a long time to fix it. So, and it's particularly, we see this with metal shavings in medicines, glass shards in vials, all things that would be unconscionable to give to patients. But the key is being on top of those good manufacturing practices and maintaining facilities to avoid those kinds of events. And where you have facilities that are in 100% production mode all of the time, it's often difficult to maintain your facilities and modernize them in a way that's needed to, again, assure that for a company to assure that they are producing a reliably high-quality product.
Thank you,
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. I believe Ms. Plone has a follow-up as well.
Well, Dr. Coe, as Mr. Shimkus said earlier, classic economics would suggest that when a product is in demand, prices should rise and the market establish a new equilibrium. Yet we're now in the 7th consecutive year with more shortages than the year before. So I'm also curious why the market has failed to establish an equilibrium, because both Mr. Shimkus and Mr. Guthrie discussed public program pricing constraints, and as I understand these constraints, they apply to brand name drugs and not generics. Is that correct, that they only apply to the name brand and not generics?
Well, Congressman, those economic issues are precisely the ones that we are analyzing right now, and we have especially our Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation and health economists looking at the economic principles and the modeling that could help us predict where we need to go in the future. So thank you again for raising these issues. These are very, very complicated business and economic models we have come to find.
But generic drugs are where we've seen most of the drug shortages in recent years.
That's
so,
right.
I mean, if there is that distinction, is that the problem?
Well, we do know that it's older generic sterile injectables that are making up about 3/4 of these shortages, and so that's where we are indeed focusing our attention.
I don't know if you asked, if either Mr. Shimkus or Mr. Guthrie asked you to get, if you said you were going to get back to them, but if, I would really like to get some answers, obviously you're not prepared or you don't feel you have an answer today, but I'd like you to get back to us through the chairman if you could.
We're happy to,
Yeah.
Congressman. So again, I did mention we have an upcoming report from the FDA that's going to give further analysis and further economic analyses that are also intensely underway right now.
Is that going to relate to this, or you don't know for sure?
Well, hopefully we'll get a better understanding of root causes and then, of course,
all right, but if Mr. Chairman, if he could get back to us on that, because I know many of us have sort of asked the same question. Sure. And really would like to know.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, if the chairman would yield just on this point.
Go ahead.
And I thank my friend for following up on this debate and this question. But in my opening statements, I didn't just focus on the government pricing. I did say insurers too. So I mean, we're all kind of in this together, and if the market's going to work, it's got to work. And so I just wanted to just correct the record. I wasn't just picking on.
Oh no, I understand. I just wanted to bring up the public program aspect. But whenever get back to us on it, because I think, I understand. To be perfectly honest, a lot of the questions that we've asked today, we've gotten a response, and we have a little better idea. But I almost feel like more questions have been raised than answered today, and that's not anybody's fault. But that's kind of where I feel we are right now, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. If you'll respond to the questions in writing, we'll get those to the committee members.
Sure,
and look forward to reading your report. And Chair, thanks the first panel for your
Thank you very
testimony.
much.
Thank you. We'll call at this time panel 2. And our second panel consists of 7 witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Jonathan Kafer, Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Teva Health Systems and testifying on behalf of Teva Pharmaceuticals. Next is Mr. John Gray, the President and CEO of Healthcare Distribution Management Association. Our third witness is Mr. Kevin Colgan. He is the Corporate Director of Pharmacy at Rush Medical Center in Chicago. Our fourth witness is Mr. Mike Alkire, Chief Operating Officer of Premier, Inc. Next, we will hear from Dr. Charles Penley, who is testifying on behalf of the American Society of Clinical Oncology. We also have Mr. Richard Paletti, the Vice President of Operations at Lancaster General Health. And finally, Dr. Robert DiPola, Director of the Cancer Institute of New Jersey. We thank all of you for coming. Your written testimony will be entered to the record. We ask that each of you would summarize your testimony in 5-minute opening statements. And Mr. Kafer, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Pitts, Ranking Member Pallone, and distinguished colleagues within the subcommittee and full committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I am, as referenced by the Chairman, my formal testimony has been submitted to you. I am more than willing to answer questions specific to that testimony throughout the questioning period, and I'll summarize my remarks in my opening. I am John Kafer. I'm Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Teva Health Systems, representing Teva Pharmaceuticals. Teva Pharmaceuticals is a global leader in brand, generic, biologic pharmaceutical products. We are a market leader in many of the markets in which we serve. Here in the United States, we are the market leader in generic products. We have a vast portfolio, including many dosage forms, including oral solid presentations, injectable presentations, including a significant portfolio of oncology, generic, injectable presentations. And I look forward during the questions period to share some insights specific to that very important category. As referenced, we are a market leader. Teva is a market leader, and we understand and embrace the responsibility that does come with being a market leader. And on that context, I am very happy to be here today. One side note, as all of us have been, we all have personal stories as it relates to family, friends, people we know, individuals that have been impacted by not being able to get medications. In my particular situation, I have friends and family as well. Given the role I play, they reach out to me hoping I may be able to make a difference. Unfortunately, there's many times I can't, and it's very challenging. At the same time, given the role I play, I hear from patients, I hear from family members of patients, I hear from constituents, I hear from physicians, looking to the manufacturer to ask the questions why, and we respond, and we certainly understand that. And at the same time, I see every day when I go to work hundreds and hundreds of people working tirelessly around the clock, sparing no expense, to do whatever we can to return to historical production volumes so we can get these critical products back to market. As referenced in earlier testimony, this is a very complex multi-stakeholder issue, and it's going to require the coordination and communication amongst all those stakeholders in order for us to resolve this issue. As noted in earlier testimony as well, there are many factors that impact the drug shortage issue, whether it be API being sourced and available. We've discussed that. The industry has experienced manufacturing challenges. I'll go into greater detail specific to how it impacts a sterile facility versus an oral solid facility. And there has been regulatory impacts on facilities. As appropriate and as required, the FDA regulates these complex facilities and these products to assure that the manufacturing community is operating within full CGMP compliance, ultimately to provide the highest quality of products to all of us in this room. We understand that, and as a manufacturer, we certainly embrace that. Most of the shortages, however, are unanticipated. Those unanticipated shortages can have boomerang effects up and down the supply chain. And as noted in earlier testimony, as we'll get into in greater detail, there are a handful of manufacturers that sometimes are unable to pick up the lost supply from another manufacturer, and we'll go into detail around that as well. What is Teva doing specifically to address some of the drug shortage issues? We have significantly made a significant investment in enhancement of our facilities as well as our quality systems. We have unrestricted access to our resources globally to prioritize those people in those facilities that require the work that needs to be done to get the products back to market. We have embarked on a very aggressive redundancy plan. There is no requirement to a manufacturer to have a secondary or tertiary facility qualified to manufacture these products. We have identified, in combination with Drug Shortage Division, those most critically medically necessary products, and we have 5 FDA-approved facilities, and we have put a team in place that is actively working on redundancy planning for these critical products. As referenced also through the testimony of Dr. Queter and Dr. Coe, there has been extraordinary collaboration within the FDA branches as it relates to resolving and mitigating these challenges. I can speak to a couple of different references. One, there was a discussion earlier in testimony around coordination of importation of products to alleviate critical drug shortages. There was a specific instance in which we worked with the FDA to bring in a product called leucovorin that's used in combination with chemotherapy twofold to enhance the effectiveness of that treatment as well as to mitigate side effects. We brought it in, we had a significant amount of resources to work collaboratively with that, and we were able to help mitigate that problem. The solutions that we're looking at, recognizing it as a multi-stakeholder issue, I do need to comment that as it exists today, there is tremendous cooperation within the drug shortage group and the manufacturing community. As referenced earlier, there is no formal process. It is an informal process. And I can speak on behalf of Teva and the other leading manufacturers in this space that we do all collaborate with the FDA, as testified earlier, and we take that very seriously. And we are responding where we can. The doxorubicin example mentioned earlier, I received a phone call from drug shortage, do what we can. We were able to work in collaboration with them and get product released to market, and we continue to prioritize those types of products. During question, I'll be more than happy to go into greater detail around how we're seeing the coordination and the effectiveness and how we would like to see a greater communication amongst multiple stakeholders beyond the manufacturer and FDA. Going forward, we have seen discretion by the agency deployed to allow earlier availability of key products. That is working. We would like to see a process in which we can get that on the front end as well to potentially mitigate potential problems while incorporating remedial steps that have no impact or concern to the patient. I know I'm over my time, Chair, so I apologize.
Chair, thanks. Gentlemen, Mr. Gray, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Pitts, Ranking Member Pallone, and the members of the Energy Commerce Subcommittee on Health. I'm John Gray, President and CEO of the Healthcare Distribution Management Association, Arlington, Virginia. I appreciate the opportunity to come here today, provide some overview of the pharmaceutical distribution system, and to inform your committee on efforts regarding some critically important issue around drug shortages. A little history, HDMA is a national association representing America's primary healthcare distributors, a vital link in our nation's system of healthcare distribution. Each business day, our 34 member companies ensure that nearly 9 million prescriptions, medicines, and healthcare products are delivered safely and efficiently to nearly 200,000 pharmacies and clinics, hospitals, nursing homes, and other providers nationwide. Approximately 90% of all pharmaceutical product sales in the United States flow through our member companies. Continuous innovation, operational efficiency have really set our members apart in trying to annually contribute an estimated about $42 billion in value to the nation's healthcare system. Now, federal law defines wholesale drug distribution as, quote, the distribution of prescription drugs to other than the consumer or patient. Wholesale distributors are licensed entities that are bound by a range of federal and state laws. In addition, our distributors must comply with licensure requirements in every state in which they operate. It's important to note HDMA members are primary distributors. I said that earlier and I'll reiterate it. But they buy predominantly from pharmaceutical manufacturers and sell only to appropriate licensed customers, the vast majority are which are pharmacies or other healthcare providers. Pharmaceutical products are distributed through a highly coordinated supply chain in this country to provide maximum efficiency and effectiveness and safety. Pharmacies and other healthcare entities generally place orders for prescription medicines by 8 o'clock in the evening and receive deliveries from their distributors the next morning. The average distribution center in this country processes about nearly 2,000 orders a day. On the average, a warehouse maintains about 30 days of inventory level. This number varies by product. It's subject to demand, seasonality, cost, and other factors. Pharmaceutical products with special handling requirements typically have shorter cycle times in the system. Distributors provide an array of services for manufacturers beyond simply the movement of product, including but not limited to receivables risks management for the manufacturer, customer validation, order management, inventory and management tracking, processing returns and recalls, and contract management. For pharmacy and provider customers, our distributors provide an equal array of services which include aggregate ordering, assistance with stocking needs, support information systems and software, as well as accounting and credit support. In the case of inventory management, distributors are able to fill customer orders 6 or 7 days per week, 365 days a year, which limits the need for large inventory levels at the pharmacy level. And some distributors serve to maximize the efficiency between manufacturers and healthcare providers by managing a very complex network of products and systems by efficiently providing mechanisms for the seamless transformation of information and product. Through the unique position of distributors and our close relationship with all the stakeholders, we are acutely aware of the impact of drug shortages on patients. Effectively addressing the drug shortage is difficult and complex for the entire healthcare community, in large part because the shortage typically appears with little or no warning and often requires significant resources to manage. HDMA and our member companies work hard to improve the communications within the supply chain from manufacturer to distributor to provider where possible and try to mitigate the impact of the drug shortage. Although distributors do not manufacture a product, they do play an important role in helping to coordinate and share information about drug shortages when those shortages arise. Distributors are typically notified of a shortage by a manufacturer or a provider partner. Once that shortage information is received, distributors communicate with their manufacturer partners about product availability to understand the scope and expected duration of any shortage. Then the distributor works as quickly as possible with customers to fill orders to the extent they are able to do so based upon purchasing history or, if necessary, to identify alternative products in the supply chain. So as you can appreciate, there's a delicate balance between the need to share information at the appropriate level at the same time preventing an environment for panic buying. HDMA has worked collaboratively with the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, federal agencies, and the Congress and other supply chain partners to share expertise about the whole drug supplies chain. In addition, we're working with our distributor members and manufacturer providers to update voluntary industry guidelines on improving communications between supply chain partners in the event of shortages. We hope this effort will contribute to the better management of the process in its entirety. HDMA strongly believes healthcare industry as a whole, the government and stakeholders must continue to work together towards some collaborative solutions at this problem that mitigate the impact of the shortages and, most importantly, the impact on the stakeholder, the key stakeholder, the patient. To that end, I thank you again for this invitation to participate, and I hope the overview has been valuable and look forward to your questions.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Mr. Colgan, you're recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Pitts, Ranking Member Pallone, and distinguished members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing. My name is Kevin Colgan. I'm the Corporate Director of Pharmacy at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, Illinois. I am here today because I cannot serve my patients or their caregivers due to shortages of medications, some of them critical to patient care. While there's no single solution that will immediately solve the problem of drug shortages, there are things we can do to help address this issue. First, bipartisan legislation in both houses of Congress would enable FDA to require that drug manufacturers report confidentially to the agency when they experience an interruption in the production of their product. This early warning system will help the FDA work with other manufacturers to ramp up production when another company experiences a problem. Moreover, the bills call upon FDA to work with manufacturers to develop continuity of supply plans, which could help to identify backup sources of active pharmaceutical ingredients and produce redundancies in inventory to serve as reserve supplies. Well, some have argued that this legislation won't have any impact. We disagree. You have already heard this morning from the FDA that in 2010, 38 drug shortages were avoided, and last year, 99 drug shortages were avoided when the agency was given advance notice. Further, opponents of this approach argue that it will lead to hoarding. We know that hoarding already occurs. How do some find out about drug shortages before others? We don't know all the answers to this question. What we do know is that early warning to FDA will help make sure that everyone has the same information at the same time. Simply put, the public benefit of an early warning system far outweighs the risk of hoarding. In other emergency preparedness areas, such as bioterrorism, flu pandemic, and natural disasters, we develop action plans and communication channels among necessary responders. Why would we approach drug shortages any differently? Second, health system pharmacists have been collaborating with other clinicians and members of the supply chain to work with the FDA to address this problem. For example, we believe FDA should have and devote necessary resources to speed up the regulatory process to address drug shortages. Other alternatives include improved communication between FDA field personnel and the drug shortages program to assess the comparative risk of public harm when a potential enforcement action will cause or worsen a drug shortage. Exploring incentives for manufacturers to continue or to re-enter the market, a generic user fee program to speed approvals, and last, ensuring the agency has the funding it needs to carry out its mission. Many of you sitting in this room, sometime over the next several months, is going to receive news that you, family member, or friend has been diagnosed with cancer, needs surgery, has been admitted to an intensive care unit, has a serious infection that requires an IV antibiotic or antiviral medication, or has a premature baby or grandbaby that requires nutritional support. And the last thing you want to hear is that we don't have first-line medication therapy to treat you, that the medication we have may not work as well and could cause heart damage, but it's all we have to offer, or that we are delaying your treatment until you are able to obtain drugs that are in short supply. These are all situations I, my clinical pharmacy staff, and the physicians, nurses, and respiratory therapists that we work with have had to manage over the past year. From our perspective, drug shortages represents a national health care crisis. We don't have one single solution, but we've offered a number of solutions that together can help resolve this problem. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and all the members of the committee for the opportunity to provide input on this problem. Thank you.
Chair, thanks to gentlemen. We're in the middle of votes. We have 14 votes. We're going to try to get a couple more before we go over and recess for the vote, and we'll come back. So, Mr. Alcar, you're recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Pitts, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the committee. I'm Mike Alcar, Chief Operating Officer of the Premier Healthcare Alliance. Premier is owned by not-for-profit hospitals and health systems. We use the power of collaboration to lead the transformation to high-quality and cost-effective health care. One of the ways we do this is by aggregating the buying power of 2,500 hospitals to get the most effective medical supplies and drugs at the best prices. I thank the committee for leading efforts to address drug shortages. As you are aware, the number of drug shortages has tripled since 2005, and many of these medicines are essential to patient care. Premier set out to understand the extent of the problem through a survey. We found that between July and December 2010, more than 240 drugs were either in short supply or completely unavailable in 2010. Over 400 generic equivalents were back-ordered for more than 5 days. Many of the drugs noted as back-ordered in 2010 have remained unavailable or in short supply in 2011, and 80% of the hospitals reported that shortages resulted in a delay or cancellation of a treatment. Drug shortages also carry a cost, an estimated $415 million annually through the purchase of more expensive substitutes and additional labor costs. We don't have the ability to estimate the financial impact of shortage drugs where there are no alternatives. We are working to diminish these costs by determining manufacturing capabilities to assess whether a manufacturer can supply the market. We look for alternatives if capabilities don't meet demand. Instituting an early warning system for hospitals to notify us of shortages. Once notified, we determine the scope of the problem and communicate with the FDA. And exploring longer-term contracts with manufacturers to create more predictable volumes and stability in the market. In this crisis, we hope people will do everything they can to help patients get the drugs they need. Instead, we have seen the gray market vendors taking advantage of the problem, offering to sell shortage products at exorbitant prices. Premier analyzed unsolicited offers from gray market vendors on shortage drugs. We compared their prices to Premier's. We found that average markups were 650%, and the highest markup was 4,500%. In this case, a vial to treat high blood pressure that sells for $25.90 was offered for $1,200. Markups were 4,000% for drugs to treat leukemia and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, 3,100% for drugs to help cancer patients retain bone marrow. 45% were marked up 1,000% above a normal price, and a quarter were marked up 2,000%. Where and how gray market vendors are getting these medicines, no one knows. And how can the integrity of these drugs be ascertained? Again, a question that few know. That's why Premier has taken a position that pharmacies should avoid these vendors and stick to known primary distributors. But in times of shortage, pharmacies may need to look elsewhere. In these cases, we develop a set of best practices. These practices include verifying the product's chain of custody, confirming licensure, verifying that a seller is authorized to sell the product, and confirming that the seller is a verified, accredited wholesale distributor. But in our view, the best way to stop price gouging is to fix the drug shortage crisis. We ask the committee and the FDA to consider the following. Speed the approval process for medically necessary drugs that appear to be in shortage. Encourage FDA to engage stakeholders in discussions determining whether a drug is medically necessary. The objective is to prioritize drugs that are necessary for treatment and also may be at risk for shortages. Grant the DEA flexibility to adjust quotas that are limiting the amount of active ingredients manufacturers may purchase for controlled substances, thus limiting their ability to ramp up production when a supplier exits the market. Fast-track approvals of new active pharmaceutical ingredient suppliers for medically necessary drugs in shortage. Work with manufacturers to slow the trend of acquiring raw materials outside the U.S. Require manufacturers to notify the FDA of planned supply interruptions. This will allow time to work with remaining manufacturers to increase production. And establish an early warning point of contact at the FDA. In closing, I thank the committee for the opportunity to share what we have learned about drug shortages and the alarming impact it has on the safety and health of our communities, as well as our health care costs. Premier stands ready to assist Congress in finding ways to ensure a safe, reliable drug supply.
Chair thanks the gentleman, and again, we appreciate your patience. We've got 5 minutes left for a vote. I think we will break here and come back as soon as the last vote is over and continue the testimony. Chair recognizes Mr. Pallone.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to ask unanimous consent to submit the written statement for the record of Congressman Matheson.
Without objection, so ordered. At this point, the subcommittee stands in recess until after the last vote.
Representing a fill rate of about 80%. In other words, 892 line items ordered in August were not received. Every disruption to medication supply creates new responsibilities to investigate alternative treatments and evidence, to update protocols, procedures, and various technologies. Additionally, we must disseminate effective education on alternatives not always readily familiar to frontline caregivers. In our fast-paced, complex environment, every substitution adds variation and risk. These logistical tasks consume significant dedicated hours from multiple stakeholders and staff working collaboratively on detailed plans to maintain safety while requiring execution in limited timeframes. This means working with anesthesiologists and emergency physicians in contemplating how we might maintain airway in a patient presenting to the trauma center without the availability of a paralyzing agent. Neonatologists considering how we may best provide nutritional care to compromised premature infants. Infectious disease specialists searching for alternative anti-infectives, and oncologists discussing alternative treatment regimens midway through a course of therapy. And more importantly, how we will reveal to patients that we may not have the medication necessary to treat their ailments. In our opinion, this issue represents a national healthcare crisis. Relieving and minimizing avoidable drug shortages requires both short-term intervention and longer-term permanent solutions. These potential solutions require system changes and increased capacity, including the following. Establish an early warning system, as proposed in bipartisan legislation currently in both houses of Congress, to immediately help to avert or mitigate drug shortages proactively. Establish improved communications between the FDA and manufacturers to develop evidence-based allocation plans for critical drug therapies, secure the pharmaceutical supply chain, and direct available supplies to our most critical patient populations. Explore incentives to encourage drug manufacturers to stay in, re-enter, or initially enter the market critical to specific drugs in short supply. These could include creation of a fast track for approval of new production lines, alternate manufacturing sites, or new suppliers of raw materials for medically necessary drugs in shortage or vulnerable to shortage without compromising the quality and safety. Again, I want to thank the committee for holding this hearing. Lancaster General offers its continued support and commitment to assist in the development of solutions that will help to prevent and mitigate risks caused by drug shortages. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Dr. DePola, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your statement.
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Pitts and Ranking Member Pallone and members who are the subcommittee. My name is Robert DePola. I am Director of the Cancer Institute of New Jersey, the State of New Jersey's National Cancer Institute designated Comprehensive Cancer Center. I also speak as a member of the American Association for Cancer Research, AACR, and its Science, Policy, and Legislative Affairs Committee. Thank you for convening this hearing and recognizing the impact that the current drug shortage problem is having on our patients and on our ability to advance cancer research and improve patient outcomes. You've heard about the effects of drug shortages on treating patients. As a director of an NCI-designated comprehensive cancer center and a medical oncologist myself who treats and cares for patients, I have the same frustrations regarding the care of our patients and the negative impact of drug shortages. This impact is not only immediate for the patients in our clinics today, but also affects the future care of cancer patients, because the next generation of cancer therapy is driven by today's clinical trials that are critical to meeting the national goal of improving the outcomes for cancer patients. Shortages of drugs is actually, as you know and you heard today, a very complex problem. There are a number of ideas regarding what is causing them and how they can be remedied. I am here today to discuss how this growing problem of shortages of already approved drugs, which in some cases, as you've heard, have been used and made for decades, is affecting our best cancer care, our clinical trials, and is threatening our ability to continue on our trajectory of steadily improving cancer patient outcomes. FDA statistics show that the number of drug shortages has more than tripled over the past 6 years, with a marked increase in drugs involving sterile injectables, which negatively impacts the treatment of cancer patients. Again, as you've heard, that most shortages in oncology are sterile injectables. The medications in short supply include cancer treatment drugs, anesthetics, antimicrobials, and pain medications. A list maintained by the American Society of Health System Pharmacists recently identified 193 shortages in 2011, of which 22 are cancer drugs, and the shortage is predicted to worsen. These include drugs that are standard treatment regimens used to treat patients with many different cancers in both adults and in children. These shortages are now affecting clinical trial options for patients with cancer. Due to the uncertainty of being able to obtain many of these drugs, enrollment of patients on clinical trials has been delayed or stopped in several of our trials. Many of these drugs that are in short supply are part of the standard regimens in which new treatments are added or compared to within a clinical trial. Many of the drugs on the shortage list are also used in our large national cooperative group trials. The Coalition of Cancer Cooperative Groups reports that approximately 50% of active cooperative group cancer clinical trials involve drugs subject to shortages. Many reports contain examples in which sites are unable to enroll patients on approved clinical trials due to a lack of drug supply. Investigators in these clinical studies are unable to enroll new patients when the drug supply is not available. Patients on study are sometimes receiving alternate drugs when supply is not available, and there is concern about interpretation of results when drug substitutions occur. It is important to remember that the impact from the drug shortages on clinical trials today will also have a long-term effect on cancer research and future treatment options for cancer patients. Clinical trials represent the final step of a long process of developing new therapies that improve the outcome of patients and add treatments for patients in which there were no effective prior options. When, after years of effort, a single researcher discovers a potential new drug or treatment, that particular new drug is often best added to an existing treatment in combination and/or tested in comparison to the best current treatment in a clinical trial. If that trial yields positive results, patients can ultimately have access to a new and improved drug or treatment combination. Currently, however, we are running out of many of the existing drugs. When a clinical trial runs out of a drug, even temporarily, the trial results may be compromised, and an enormous amount of work and expense is wasted. This means that during a clinical trial, a shortage of only a few weeks in an existing drug might mean delays in years of developing a new drug. In other words, the drug shortages of today can have a ripple effect on the availability of new drugs and treatment combinations tomorrow. Today, we estimate that 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will develop cancer in their lifetimes. This year, over 1.5 million Americans are estimated to be diagnosed with cancer, and more than half a million Americans are expected to die of their disease. That's more than 1,500 people a day, or more than 1 per minute. While these numbers seem staggering, we have made great strides in our ability to diagnose, treat, and prevent cancer, and are at a most promising time in cancer research. Earlier this week, the American Association for Cancer Research issued a progress report marking 40 years of progress in fighting cancer. In fact, thanks to advances made in cancer research, today more than 68% of adults are living 5 or more years, which increased from 50% in 1975. It was also reported that in the period from 1990 to 2007, death rates for cancer in the U.S. decreased by 22% for men and 14% for women. The challenge we now face is to continue to turn groundbreaking science into life-saving care at even greater speed. By facilitating clinical trials, we lay the groundwork for discoveries in basic cancer research to be translated into cutting-edge treatments for cancer patients. The current drug shortage is hindering our ability to treat cancer patients overall. We are entering a new era of cancer treatment and prevention. However, an inability to have best treatment for our patients in general and conduct clinical trials is a serious impediment to our goal and will hamper our ability to reduce the toll on cancer for the people of our nation. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Thanks all of our 7 witnesses for your thoughtful testimony, and we will begin questionings at this time. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for that purpose. Let me begin with you, Mr. Pilletti. A couple of questions. Can you walk us through what happens from your perspective when there's a drug shortage? Who notifies you? How much warning do you get? What do you need to do to notify the people in your organization?
It differs in every instance, but like I said, a lot of times we find out when a drug order doesn't come, our buyer and receiving process, through the receiving process, we learn that we didn't get a medication on order. The buyer then has to follow up with the wholesaler to find out if that's a temporary outage, when we would maybe next expect that, and then that would relay into an investigation of more than probably for us 100 to 150 inventory locations in automated cabinets throughout our facility. So we look at what we have on hand, how much we continually use on a day-to-day basis, and estimate how much supply we would have if we continued business as is. Based on that and the information we get, we have to convene a team. It's typically pharmacists, nurses, the specific stakeholder physicians, depending on what medicinal it is. We look at the indications, we look for alternative therapies that we may have available to us, and kind of assess how critical the nature of the shortage is. And then based on that, we have to create action plans. Sometimes it involves the pharmacy manually preparing specific minimal doses of medications to make our supply last as long as conceivably possible. That was the case with one instance last October that to me was the tipping point of the drug shortages with a drug called succinylcholine. That week came down to the last couple days of therapy and really contemplating canceling surgeries and how we would manage those situations.
Is there any way at present for you to anticipate a shortage?
Through some online web sources, as good as the information is based on what the drug companies reveal and what's published, we have an active surveillance program now that goes out to the FDA website, that goes out to ASHP resources to look at that information, which sometimes is published with alternatives. So the University of Utah's Drug Information Center has been very helpful in that regard, but it's only as good as the information that's available. And a lot of times, no information exists until we self-report that we're having difficulty.
Yeah, thank you. Let's just go down the line. Mr. Kafer, from your company's experience, what are the main reasons for a drug going into shortage, and how does your company work with FDA to notify them of the shortage?
From a notification standpoint, our primary point of contact when we become aware of a shortage for any number of reasons, we could have had a manufactured lot rejected during release testing. And what that means is after you finish your manufacturing process, every injectable goes through about a 3 to 4 week series of tests. If those tests failed for quality reasons or unspecified or not meeting a specification, you reject that lot. If we anticipate a shortage, our primary point of contact continues to be FDA drug shortage. As testified this morning by Dr. Queter, I think the point was made that they do not immediately post that information because that can trigger additional behavior where the awareness of a potential shortage could lead to purchasing of another generic product or even another comparative therapy, which can drain those supplies as well. So we coordinate directly with the drug shortage group, and then we coordinate with our hospital partners and our distribution partners.
And how have you worked with the FDA to alleviate a shortage?
We worked extremely well with the FDA. There has been many instances in which we have collaborated. I think through the drug shortage group, they've been playing quarterback on this. I think we mentioned earlier this morning, it's not a formal process, but they do a fantastic job in pulling instances together. There's been at least 3 occasions where we had submitted a prior approval supplement, and by definition of that, that's an extensive review that indicates that we have had significant changes to a product or process, which would typically take long, but they have been able to expedite those reviews and get those approved in about a 3-month period that allowed us to get those critical products to market.
Thank you. Mr. Gray, can inventory management practices create the impression of a drug shortage, and how do distributors and others work to avoid that situation?
Well, inventory management practices, or just-in-time, whatever you want to call it, those are actually across the supply chain, from production, just-in-time production to just-in-time delivery. Our members focus on the delivery side, the manufacturers on the production side. That actually is a process developed over the last 25 years in the consumer goods area, which is really to spread out the predictability of manufacturing, as well as alerting both the manufacturer, the wholesaler, and the retailer or pharmacy when shortages, when product potentially is short. It's more real-time information across. So the reality is the inventory management programs are really there to spot the shortages potentially before they happen. And that's really what's been developing since the late 1980s from the food industry into the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm not sure there is a connection there. I've heard that today. If you really look at the science of that, the mentality behind those is to identify those shortages early on.
Now, when a secondary distributor purchases a drug product, they often pay more than the primary distributor would pay. So if they then charge more for the drug, they're simply responding to the market, aren't they? This is not a gray market practice, is it? Can you contrast that with the gray market?
I can't speak to the secondaries. I know our members, our 34 primary wholesalers, we're buying directly from manufacturers. And then we sell only to state licensed entities, be that a secondary distributor, hospital, pharmacy, or whatever. So, and usually we are under contract pricing with the manufacturers for those products. So if we're selling them on down to a provider, it's usually a contract price already preset. What a secondary would do with that product, I do not know. In terms of pricing, I have no information on that.
Thank you. Mr. Colgan, in your testimony, you state that there's no one solution to this problem. However, you stress the importance of enacting legislation to require manufacturers to notify FDA of possible shortages. Can you explain why this requires legislation to accomplish and why it needs to be done on a confidential basis?
Sure. I think when there's a leak or a hole in the dam, you need to stick your finger in it first to stop the leak. Then you need to explore what the reason is for it, and then you need to solve the problem. What this legislation really does is sticks your finger in the hole in the dam to stop the leak. And basically, we've heard from testimony today from the FDA that they've been able to basically abort 99 drug shortages this year with regards to early warning systems. So we believe that's needed. I'm definitely not in favor of regulation when regulation isn't needed. But honestly, anything that I'm putting in my body or my mouth, I want to make sure that it is manufactured in the right way. It's done correctly. And certainly we support the FDA in terms of their role in protecting drug safety within this country. Needless to say, they need to be able to have the power and the jurisdiction to enforce early reporting of drug shortages. And the other thing that I said I think was really most important is get the word out to everybody at the same time. It's beyond me sometimes that others have drug product when I don't have drug product. When drugs come back onto the market, there's only certain places that you can get those drugs from, and you can't get it from your normal supply chain. So again, I think we need the regulation in order to solve the problems that we have at hand.
Thank you. Mr. Alkire, we've heard that often the end users of drugs that go into shortage have very little advanced warning. For example, a surgeon may find out that the preferred anesthetic drug is not available only after the patient is prepped and on the operating room table. How does this happen? How do hospitals give warning of shortages to their own doctors?
You know, for the most part, now, I've not necessarily heard that, but for the most part, there is very strong communication that actually occurs in the hospitals, and doctors are made aware of what's happening from a shortage, especially as they're doing prep for these procedures. And then they have to go about figuring out what are the potential clinical alternatives to ensure that their patients are getting the highest quality care.
Okay. Dr. Penley, how many drugs that you use in your practice regularly go into shortage? It appears that there are a finite number of drugs that regularly go into shortage.
The current number for oncology drugs is around 23, I believe, and those are very commonly used agents. We would use most of them in our practice on a day-in, day-out basis.
And is there any way at present for you to anticipate a shortage?
On a practice level, it's difficult. We get information the same way most of these folks do through the FDA website or the hospital pharmacist website. ASCO, our national organization, serves primarily as an information gathering and distributing service there for our members. And certainly at times when these things are, we see that they're going to be prolonged shortages. ASCO convenes expert panels to try to brainstorm and come up with the best available workarounds in situations where we have to make substitutions. We try to bring together the best minds in oncology so that they can come up with workable and reasonable solutions for our patients when we know that those drugs are going to be in shortage for any length of time.
Thank you, Dr. Diapolo. Your description of the impact of drug shortages on future cancer patients because of clinical trials may have to be stopped or not started in the first place is quite compelling. You mentioned that 50% of the cooperative group trials involve drugs that are subject to shortage. That sounds like it should have a devastating effect on cancer research. Could you give us an idea of the magnitude of this problem?
I think that it's, you know, as we're all concerned with the, you know, the shortage even worsening, and already we're seeing a number of trials, even within our cancer center. As an NCI-designated comprehensive cancer center, we take care of patients with both the best standard treatments and then offer clinical trials for patients who want that option. And those clinical trials are geared towards our new discoveries of new regimens. If a clinical trial is compromised because it needed to substitute a particular drug for another drug, or in some cases clinical trials won't allow a substitution, all of the work that went into the discovery, getting to the point of the clinical trial, is going to be compromised. And so, you know, we've made gains on cancer research overall, but ultimately the discoveries in terms of the targets in the lab, the drug development, and then either the comparison to these existing drugs or the addition of these new targeted agents to existing drugs make it very, very difficult to continue this. And I agree that, you know, those statistics relate to data we've been given regarding the cooperative group trials. Those are usually the large national trials that do comparisons. And nowadays, most of the trials don't contain a placebo, so at least the existing drug is part of the clinical trial. So this could be, is already a very difficult and concerning problem, and the way the stats are looking may worsen.
Thank you. I've gone way over my time. I thank the ranking member for his indulgence, and I will yield to Mr. Pallone for such times as he may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask unanimous consent to put in the record this statement from, I guess, the Fight Colorectal Cancer Group on the U.S. drug shortage. You have it.
Okay, without objection, so ordered.
And I'm going to just go back to what you said, Mr. Chairman, or follow up on what you asked Dr. Diapolo. who, as you know, is from my district. The Cancer Institute is in New Brunswick in my district. You want to give us an example of do you have an example of a clinical trial that was halted at the Cancer Institute because of the drug shortage? Is there an actual example at the Cancer Institute in New Jersey where you had to halt because of the drug shortage?
We've had, yes. I mean, there are actually a number of examples, trials where that we're about to launch that we've made. We've made the plans and development to start a clinical trial. Most of them, Congressman Pallone, have to do with trials where a new drug is added to existing therapies. And we've had difficulties in at least one or two trials where a new drug was added to a combination that included Taxol as one particular example. And the trial was held in terms of initiating the trial. What ends up happening is in the clinic, we then have concern in offering patients who actually come to the center looking for these new options in terms of clinical trials, the trial when we're not assured of the particular drug supply. There was another trial where a young patient with breast cancer was enrolled, where Doxil was included, and along with Doxil, along with another set of combination of drugs, and it required amendment to the trial to allow the patient to be treated to change the drug from Doxil to another agent, which again has concerns about compromising the trial, and again the delay involved in trying to look at options and then even change the drug, because in that case the trial allowed. And then in a number of cases, delayed trials where doxorubicin was part of the regimen, again with a novel what's called PARP inhibitor, which actually in the case, the example I'm referring to is an NCI trial that was delayed. So all of these, taken together, any one of these weeks, months, delays really delay us getting an answer. And just as, or more importantly, patients are coming because they're concerned that in that case, the standard option may not be what they're looking for or enough, and they're looking for these options in clinical trials.
Sure. Now, just give me an idea. How do you think the drug shortage impacts the future of cancer research and treatment? Are you concerned and, what, just in an overall sense?
Well, I think, it's going to be important, and that's why I think this is important that everybody get together in a collaborative way to look at all of the root causes and come up with solutions, because it is concerning, especially if it does worsen, and it is, at least the statistics would indicate that it is. So I think it is concerning. I think that we need to keep pushing forward in all areas of research. As you know well, it includes the discovery on the basic science end, leading into the efforts of translating into clinical trials. But it is concerning, especially with the statistics that we're seeing.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask Mr. Kafer from Teva a couple things. A frequent cited reason for shortages is manufacturing problems, and of course we've heard that sterile injectable drugs are hard to manufacture. So, and if your supplier, I guess, has a problem, that can lead to a shortage. So, obviously there are circumstances outside of your control that can interfere with your ability to deliver a product. Are these problems unique to the drugs prone to shortages? For example, are all sterile injectable drugs prone to shortage, or is there something about these drugs that makes controlling their manufacture more difficult? Are there things manufacturers can do to avoid these problems?
Well, I think as one of the things you need to understand from a complexity standpoint, by the nature of a sterile manufacturing facility, it is sterile, and it is a very complex manufacturing environment. Picture, if you will, people in spacesuits kind of doing the prep work. If you're in an oral solid manufacturing facility, it's much different. So there is more complexity. The other thing within a manufacturing facility, each technology has its own defined manufacturing line or manufacturing suite. For instance, you can't manufacture cytotoxic oncology products on the same line you would manage hormones or something of that nature. Many of the products are also, some of them are lyophilized, which is a powder. That has a very unique manufacturing suite. And a liquid fill line is also a very unique manufacturing suite. So it is possible that within one manufacturing facility that you have a disruption in just one suite, one of those technologies. And one of the questions we've heard repeatedly from the panel is specific to oncology. And it is a very dynamic, complex environment. And unfortunately, over the last couple of years, industry has had some disruptions within those manufacturing suites that we're in the stages of recovery. So we are manufacturing product, but we're in a slow build, and it's impacting, obviously, patients as the panel has testified today.
All right. Of course, we always worry, not only today, but in so many cases, about active ingredients in drugs sold in the United States that are supplied from abroad. So I guess I'm, asking you to what extent that's a problem, and, in the wake of heparin, of course, there's major concern about cracking down on some of these ingredients that are sold abroad. I mean, to what extent does the availability of these ingredients from abroad impact this discussion today? I mean, it's very likely that, we put a lot more regulation and make it more difficult for things to come from abroad.
Regardless of the materials coming from abroad or domestically, to your point regarding the heparin scare of years ago, the testing requirements and the scrutiny that we will go through before we will release the active ingredient into production is significant, and we will not jeopardize that. So the testing requirements that we impose on our manufacturing partners on the API side are significant, and there has been repeated instances in which we are failing API coming in for production because of not met our specifications. If that does happen on a repeated basis, then you're obviously going to have a gap in readily available material to produce product. So without question, for good reason, that we are testing that material to the requirements that we're required to, and we will not use it unless it passes those tests.
Now, you heard me earlier mention your testimony in the context that you and Dr. Quater, I guess, acknowledged in your testimony that it can take 2 to 3 years for FDA to approve a new facility or API supplier, and obviously that's not a good situation. However, on the first panel, they also said that FDA has the flexibility to adjust resources so that it can approve facilities and suppliers very quickly. I mean, has that been your experience, that that flexibility is exercised or works, or are you sort of sticking to this 2 to 3 years?
The standard process as it exists today historically has been 2 to 3 years for an API, secondary manufacturer approval, or a manufacturing site through traditional pass. And, those reviews take time because it is a complex review and it does require extensive work. At the same time, yes, we have seen expedited reviews in that area. We've been the beneficiary of expedited reviews to handle critical situations. But also in my earlier statement, in my opening remarks, I mentioned a lot of the shortages are unforeseen. We're applying a great deal of coordination and a great deal of collaboration when we're solving the problem. And as a standard of practice, is it possible to expedite some of those reviews as a standard of practice was the point of my written testimony. But we do see on a routine basis now we're applicable without jeopardizing the product. We will never jeopardize a product or a system, but we have seen collaboration to expedite those reviews in a matter of months.
But and I appreciate that, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, when I mentioned your 2 or 3 years in your written testimony, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but it was sort of suggested at the first panel that maybe it's not so much a problem because we can use this flexibility. But, I mean, is it your experience that there is enough flexibility to deal with these situations or not? I mean, I know that's a difficult question. You don't have to say yes or no.
I've had experience where we have had expedited reviews, collaborative work, and favorable outcomes. the volume of work that could be forthcoming based on continued remediation, I can't predict, and I can't, forecast that impact. But prior to significant shortages, which the industry planned for, so we would plan for a 2-year review. No, we knew what that type was, but that was at our own. At the time when we were just making sure we had redundancy in place for those critical products, it wasn't of immediate need. Now that we're seeing immediate need, we are seeing those expedited reviews.
All right, thanks. I just wanted to ask one more question of Mr. Colgan here, Mr. Chairman. In his written testimony, he suggests a number of incentives that might be provided to encourage manufacturers to stay in the field or enter the field. And of course, I think in principle that incentives are a good idea. If we can get more companies to manufacture these products or to produce excess supply, you would think that shortages would be less likely to occur and less severe if they do occur. But that being said, the suggestions in your testimony, I think, need a little more fleshing out for me to better understand, what you're trying to achieve or how you would achieve the goal. And I know they're only presented as options to be further explored. But I was puzzled by the suggestion of granting temporary exclusivity for a new product line of drug, either already in short supply or deemed vulnerable to a shortage, considering that the goal would seem to be to get as many companies into the field as possible. It would seem that granting exclusivity would appear to be doing the exact opposite. And it's my understanding that exclusivity works best as an incentive when a company is the only one manufacturing the product, or in the case of a new generic, is the only company offering a generic alternative to a name brand. So it's not clear to me that granting exclusivity would be much of an incentive. And I'm not trying to be critical. I just wanted you to walk me through how you think this would actually work practically.
Sure. Well, there's two things here. One is the generic user fees, and we believe those can be utilized to incent manufacturers to enter in the market or re-enter into the market in producing a product that they've produced before or not produced. We have drugs that are single source sometimes, or we have drugs where we don't have enough production and throughput. In those situations, we think within limits, this is a concept that needs to be explored in terms of some sort of temporary exclusivity in the market, so that there is a period of time that would incent a manufacturer to get into the market and produce the product. It could be that the FDA provides accelerated review of a supplemental NDA to that manufacturer, allows that manufacturer a period of 6 months or so to put the product together and produce the product. We see the whole idea of incenting the industry to jump into the generic market as being really important. Let me give you an example of that, hopefully, that will play out and you'll understand. Right now, we have production problems with carmustine. And we use this in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma as a conditioning therapy in getting patients ready for autologous bone marrow transplants. Right now, that's not a medically necessary drug because we can use bendamustine. If I have a patient who's on carmustine, I would pay $938 for that patient's drug if they had a body surface area of 2. For bendamustine, I'd pay $14,440. It advantages us to have other manufacturers in producing carmustine so we have adequate supplies and some sort of incentive that would allow them to do that, so we're not forced to use bendamustine would be very important to us in terms of securing a supply line for that drug. And it certainly adds up to the economics of the situation, too, in terms of being able to supply drug that is Category 1, recognized as the appropriate treatment for the patient, but also provides the lowest overall cost continuum of providing the care to that patient.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. And that concludes our round of questioning. Again, I'd like to thank the witnesses for your testimony, for answering the questions. We'll ask you to please respond to any questions in writing. In conclusion, I would like to thank all the witnesses and members for participating in today's hearing and remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and then I ask the witnesses to please respond promptly to the questions. And members should submit their questions by the close of business on October 7th. There being no further business, the subcommittee is adjourned.